City of Wishes, a Cinderella story. Episode 4, The Eternal Night. Written by Rachel Morgan. Narrated by Ariel Delisle. Chapter 1. In a stylishly furnished lounge in one of Vale City's most expensive apartments, the godmother dropped into an armchair with a huff. She smacked her fist down on the cushioned arm of the chair. "Why can't I find her?" she demanded, though there was no one else present to hear her question. Midnight had come and gone hours ago, and the slave girl, Elle Winter, should have returned to her attic. But she wasn't there, and no amount of magic seemed to be able to locate her. A small creature fluttered in through the open window. "Yes?" the godmother said. The pixie zoomed closer and alighted on the arm of the chair, just in front of the godmother's fist. She tilted her hat, or was it half a shell, and squeaked something. "No sign of her anywhere near the house?" the godmother asked. After another few squeaks, she sighed. "Well, thank you for looking. I appreciate it. In fact, if you don't mind hanging around, I may have further use for you. What's your name, anyway?" She listened as the pixie squeaked something unintelligible. "I'm afraid you'll have to repeat that." The pixie tried again, her words a fraction slower. "Oh, well, if you like that nickname," the godmother said, "we can go with that. Tosh. Easy enough to remember." Her phone rang, and she reached to pick it up from the side table. She tapped the screen, brought the phone to her ear, and said, "Yes?"
"I've confirmed that it's true, Godmother,"
said the man on the other end of the call.
"The vampires who invaded the ball had magic."
"I suspected as much," the godmother sighed. "Well, I suppose we couldn't expect that spell to stay a secret forever. Not while there was still a record of it out there somewhere, even if that record is incomplete." She crossed one leg over the other. "But as long as the vampires don't perform the ritual in full, their power will never last. But if they do complete it—" She frowned. There was still the problem of the missing girl. If no magic could locate her, there was a strong possibility the vampires had her. Was it too late already? "This is becoming a mess," she muttered into the phone. "I don't like mess, not unless I'm the one causing it." As an afterthought, she added, "Did the royal family survive?"
"Yes."
"Including the prince?"
"Yes."
A smile pulled at the godmother's glossy lips. "So the slave girl failed to pay her price. Well, there's a small bit of good news. Still, this allegiant mess changes things. What to do, what to do." She drummed her fingers across the top of her leg, her mind flicking through all the options and the possible outcomes.
"There's something else,"
the man on the other end of the phone said.
"There was a protest at the ball. Humans campaigning against the slave charm."
The godmother groaned. "That helps absolutely no one."
"I know. I think the king will use this to strengthen his case. He may finally be able to get the National Council to vote in favor of making the slave charm mandatory for all humans again."
"More mess," the godmother muttered. "Well, thank you for keeping me updated." She ended the call without saying goodbye. Then she let out a long sigh and returned her attention to the pixie. "Do you know what it says in our country's constitution, Tosh?" "Well, in every constitution in every country in the world, if we're going to get technical." Tosh replied with a disbelieving squeak. "Why, yes, I have memorized the Constitution of Astronerica," the godmother said. "I've been around for a very long time. Sometimes I get bored. I need to find things for my brain to do. Anyway, Tosh, the part I'd like to bring your attention to is that little bit in the Bill of Rights that mentions freedom. This, my dear young pixie, is what it says." She waved her hand, and gold letters appeared in the air as she spoke, matching her word for word. Every member of a magic-blooded high race has the right to freedom. Tosh sat on the arm of the chair and leaned back on her tiny hands. The key, of course, the Godmother said, is in the words magic-blooded. We Fae have our essence, which lengthens our lives and allows us to do a great many fantastical things no other race can do. The vampires have a type of magic that gives them long life, speed, and superior strength. And shifters have a type of magic that allows them to change their physical shape. But what do humans have? She nodded slowly as Tosh replied, an amused smile curling her lips. Correct. It does appear to suck a great deal for humans. It makes you wonder why they were ever considered a high race, doesn't it? She steepled her fingertips and pursed her lips. Unless, like me, you know the answer. She sat in silence for another few moments, then lifted her phone again and searched for a name she hadn't contacted in quite some time. Raising the phone to her ear, she murmured, It's time to move a few pieces around the game board, Tosh. Would you like to stick around and observe the fun? Chapter 2. The morning after the most disastrous ball Belmont Palace had ever hosted, Dex found himself walking along a nondescript street in a quiet borough of Vale City with a pair of women's black combat boots sitting on his upturned palms. After spending several hours this morning listening to his furious father rage about vampires and humans, he'd finally managed to get away. Sneaking out of the palace grounds without his parents' knowledge was a skill he'd mastered years ago. It was his nanny who'd first helped him when he was very young and had begged to explore the forest on the other side of the palace wall. He learned a few tricks from her, like befriending the right people on the palace staff. These days, that included the security team who monitored the back entrance near the garages, where all the palace vehicles lived. The guards didn't mind turning a blind eye as long as Dex wasn't alone. Xander or Ollie, sons of trusted noble fae families, generally accompanied him, and that always seemed to keep the guards satisfied. Dex looked down at the shoes again as he reached the intersection of two streets. The rhinestones sparkled in the morning sun. He'd found the shoes wedged between the balusters alongside the palace front steps while searching for Elle the night before, and recognized them instantly as hers. He wanted to get started immediately on a tracking spell, but his father's guards had found him at that point, and it had been impossible to get away from them for the remainder of the night. It wasn't until mid-morning that he'd come up with a good enough excuse to escape his father's office. The shoes shifted ever so slightly on Dex's palms, pointing toward the left now. He turned that way and continued walking, Ollie at his side. The two of them had parked a few streets back and left the car behind after blindly following the shoes' directions, accidentally turning up a one-way street and almost crashing into a taxi. Ollie had convinced Dex that walking was safer, though Dex found it frustratingly slow. He'd earned himself a few odd looks, wandering around holding up a pair of shoes on his hands, but he ignored the sideways glances and raised eyebrows. Just like the truth spell he'd used on Asriel, the tracking spell wasn't supposed to be known by anyone outside of law enforcement, so he certainly wasn't about to explain to anyone what he was doing. "Oh, we're turning again," he said, watching the shoes shift toward the right now. "I think we may have reached our destination," Ollie said. Dex looked up. The house he stood in front of was tall and skinny with an ivy-covered trellis covering part of the front. "Yeah, it could be." He looked around. "We're not far from the street where we dropped Elle off the first night we met her, so it makes sense." "She obviously didn't want you knowing where she lives," Ollie reminded him quietly. "Probably because she's a slave, yes," Dex said with a sigh, gripping the two shoes in one hand and lowering them to his side. He decided to tell Ollie and Xander the truth this morning before he began the tracking spell. Xander had simply shaken his head before heading out to answer a call from a palace guard, leaving Ollie to remind Dex that getting involved with a human slave probably wasn't going to end well. "But I'm going to free her," Dex said as he walked toward the stairs that led up to the front door. "And then she won't be a slave anymore."
Yes, as you've repeatedly told me, but she'll still be human, as you've repeatedly told me, Dex said. And your father will hand the country over to vampires before he lets you marry her.
Dex laughed as he reached the top of the stairs and faced Ollie.
Who said anything about marriage? Well, she's the only person you've shown more than a vague interest in, and we all know your parents are forcing you in that direction, so what am I supposed to think? I'm just here to make sure she's okay.
Dex turned to the door, raised a fist, and knocked.
And then I'm going to confront whoever her slave master is and get him or her to remove that damn charm from her leg. And then...
Dex rubbed his free hand along the back of his neck. Everything Ollie said made sense, and yet he couldn't get Elle out of his mind. He wanted to know everything about her. He wanted to hang out with her in a normal setting that didn't involve hunting for vampires or running away from them. He wanted to kiss her again. Man, he was so screwed.
Right,
Ollie muttered, as if he could hear Dex's thoughts.
Exactly. Look, I know everything you're saying is true. I know I'm only making my life harder. And not just because of my father, but because of
the darkness, he'd been about to say. It wasn't fair of him to get involved with anyone when he had a death sentence hanging over him. But at that moment, the door swung open. A young fae woman with shiny red hair and vibrant green eyes stood there. She smiled prettily.
Hi, can I help you?
Dex blinked.
I want to marry you.
He slapped a hand over his mouth. Where the hell had that come from?
You... what?
Oh, dear.
Ollie groaned from behind him. The young woman hesitated, then gasped.
Oh my goodness. Holy stars. You're him. You're Prince Chevalier.
Oh, what? No, I didn't say...
I made a wish that you'd want to marry me when you saw me, and now you're here, asking me to marry you.
She clasped her hands together and bobbed up and down.
Yes, absolutely, 100 yeses. I accept your proposal.
Whoa, hang on.
Dex clutched both combat boots to his chest, silently cursing whoever it was that first came up with wish magic.
I didn't propose. I'm looking for your Royal Highness.
A woman, probably older than the first, though also fae, swept from the shadows of the house toward the door.
What an honor. My daughter Meredith is most willing to accept your proposal.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't actually propose.
But you said you want to marry me.
The daughter, Meredith, interrupted. Dex had said that, and there was an irresistible urge inside him to say the stupid words again. He could picture Meredith in a white dress, standing across from him beneath a canopy of flowers while saying, "I do," and some completely helpless part of him wanted that, even while the logical part of his mind was repulsed.
I wished for it, she repeated. And you confirmed it, which means you have to.
Which means he now has to wish not to marry you, Ollie said, moving a little closer.
Not the first time he's had to do that, by the way,
he added with an awkward chuckle. Dex gave Meredith what he hoped was a polite smile.
I'm sorry. I'm sure you're very lovely, and someone will be a lucky man to marry you one day. But I'm afraid that man is not me.
Thank the stars for that, he added silently. If he remembered correctly from what Elle had told him, Meredith was the stepsister she didn't particularly like.
Ma'am,
he said to the other woman, who he guessed was Elle's stepmother.
I'm looking for someone. Her name is Elle. Is she here?
The woman's expression darkened, and her lips curled into the furthest thing from a genuine smile as she said,
No, she is not here, but I do apologize on her behalf for whatever she has done to you, Your Highness.
Oh, no, she hasn't done anything to me. Do you perhaps know when she might be home?
No, my sincerest apologies, Your Highness, but I do not.
Did someone say something about Elle? Dex's gaze darted further back into the house as a girl poked her head into the entrance hall.
Sienna, now is not the time,
Elle's stepmother hissed over her shoulder. Sienna. That was Elle's other stepsister, the one she cared for and said was more like a real sister. Dex craned his neck, trying to get a better look at her, to see if he could at least read something in her expression. But the two women in the doorway moved closer together, blocking Sienna from view.
Perhaps I could talk with—
I'm so sorry. I wish one of us could help you, the older woman said. But I'm afraid we are all as much in the dark as you are. Elle disappeared last night while we were out at your magnificent ball, and we haven't seen her since.
Okay, perhaps I could leave a contact number,
Dex suggested.
And when you know something about Elle, you can get in touch.
I'll take your number, Meredith said, thrusting her hand forward with a crazed glint in her eyes.
Oh, well, it wouldn't be my number specifically,
Dex told her with a strained smile.
We will, of course, inform your people the second we know anything,
Elle's stepmother said, her voice dripping fake politeness.
But I feel compelled to tell you that we're also required to contact the police once we know of her whereabouts. They want to know all about her, criminal activities.
Her criminal activities?
Dex asked, not believing the woman for a second.
Yes, Elle is our slave, you see, but she's become completely out of control. She's attempted to break the slave charm multiple times. She's stolen large amounts of essence, and now it appears she may have succeeded in running away, despite the slave charm's effects. Your Highness, I would hate for you to taint yourself by having anything further to do with her.
For several moments, Dex couldn't speak. This was Elle's slave master, or mistress, to be more precise. Someone who was a member of her family? Heat rushed through his veins.
We should go,
Ollie said hastily.
Sorry for taking up your time and for, disappointing you.
He nodded at Meredith.
Have a good day.
He gripped Dex's elbow and forced him to turn away from the door. Behind them, Elle's stepmother was saying something else, but he could barely hear it over the pounding of blood through his ears. The door shut, snapping him out of his shocked state.
That despicable woman,
he hissed.
You're absolutely right,
Ollie said, trying, and failing, to pull Dex down the steps.
But what were you going to do? It's perfectly legal for Fae to keep human slaves, and there's nothing that says the slave can't be a family member by marriage. I'm guessing it's not common since— Ollie, that woman, let it go!
Ollie insisted, gripping Dex's arms tightly and giving him a shake.
Forget about her. She looks like the kind of woman who will cause trouble if you make her unhappy, and trying to force her to set her slave free is bound to make her unhappy. Your priority is finding Elle, so let's focus on that.
Dex blinked at his friend, surprise cutting through his rage. He might have expected Xander to shake him and speak so sternly, but Ollie was usually the quieter, politer of the two. Dex breathed out slowly.
You're right. I'm sorry. Thanks for the reminder.
Ollie nodded.
Sure, you're welcome.
He stepped back and rolled his shoulders.
Sorry about the manhandling. Not a problem.
Dex took the stairs 2 at a time, then turned at the bottom and looked back at the house with a frown.
Do you think she's lying? Maybe Elle's locked up in there somewhere. I mean, the tracking spell did bring us here. Why would it do that if Elle's not inside?
Ollie reached the bottom step and looked back over his shoulder.
Well, either it brought us here because this is her location, or the spell can't find her, and therefore it's brought us to where she spent the most time, where she's left the strongest imprint. The only way the spell wouldn't be able to find her is if she's magically hidden, right? Yes, if she's hiding, or being held, in a place where magic can't reach her. Somewhere protected. If a slave were to run away, as this woman suggested, That's the kind of place she'd have to go so her master or mistress can't find her.
Dex shook his head.
I don't think Elle ran away. It wasn't her choice to leave last night. Something took her. She was completely out of control. Could it have been the slave charm? It happened at midnight, which is the same time the charm burned her leg the last time I saw her.
Perhaps, Ollie said, doubt evident in his tone.
But I don't think the slave charm normally works that way. Wait.
He looked around.
Did you hear that?
Dex glanced around the empty street as a hiss reached his ears.
Yeah, I did.
Movement caught his eyes, and he realized the girl from inside, Sienna, was leaning around the side of the house, beckoning him and Ollie closer. They hurried toward her. "I can't talk for long," she said, sending a furtive glance over her shoulder. "But I just wanted to ask, why are you looking for Elle? Did something happen last night? Did you see her somewhere?"
She was at the ball,
Dex said.
but then something pulled her away. Something magical.
She was... Sienna's eyes widened. She was at the ball?
Yes. Is she inside the house now? Was your mother lying?
No, she was telling the truth. Elle disappeared while we were out. I don't know how because there was a confinement charm on the attic, and there was no sign of her having forced her way out. She was just... gone. My mother should be able to locate her because of the slave charm, but she can't. It's driving her nuts. Dex may have imagined it, but it seemed a hint of amusement crossed Sienna's features at the idea of something driving her mother nuts. But her expression fell an instant later as she asked, "Do you think vampires got her? There was an attack at the palace last night, wasn't there? I was already gone because, well, it was weird. Elle warned me that something bad would happen last night, and that as soon as it did, I must leave and come back home to meet her here. So that's what I did when the protest started. But then afterwards, I wondered if she meant the vampires." Dex frowned.
I don't know. Some kind of magic pulled her away from me. She was literally flying through the air. So I would have said no, it couldn't have been a vampire that took her, but...
He hesitated before adding,
You must have heard by now. The vampires last night were using magic. So maybe it was one of them.
Sienna clenched her hands tightly together and pressed them to her chest. "Stars, I hope not. And yes, I did hear about that." She tossed another look over her shoulder, then said, "Could you maybe, I mean, not you necessarily, being a prince and everything, you must be very busy, but could you maybe send a message here if you find out anything about Elle? Nothing that would tell my mother exactly where she is, because that would be bad, but just to let us know she's okay. Your Highness, please?" She did a weird sort of half curtsy.
Yes, of course.
"And if she's somehow successfully broken the slave charm, or if she's able to hide permanently from my mother, then tell her not to come back. She doesn't have to worry about me. I'll be fine." Before Dex could say there was no way he'd ever encourage Elle to come back to the woman who was keeping her enslaved, Ollie asked,
Is there a reason Elle would think you're not fine?
"Oh." Sienna's eyes grew even wider. "No, of course not. She's just, my protective older sister." Dex frowned.
Are you sure?
"Yes, absolutely." She started backing away. "Thank you again for speaking with me, Your Highness, and sir. And I'm so sorry about Meredith and her stupid wish." After another quick bob that was neither curtsy nor bow, she turned and hurried away.
Well,
Ollie said as Sienna vanished around the side of the house.
at least we know Elle's not here, which is good news because she's nowhere near her horrid stepmother, but bad news because we have no idea where to look next.
Dex finished with a sigh. He turned and began walking away from the house, ignoring the part of himself that desperately wanted to run back up the stairs and into the house, grab Meredith's hand and ask her to marry him.
Next step,
He muttered.
is to wish away the unnerving feeling of wanting to marry that girl. After that, we figure out what kind of magic might possibly be hiding Elle.
Actually, Ollie said, and Dex looked over his shoulder to see Ollie frowning at his phone.
We might not need to do much figuring out. Xander's been trying to call. He managed to gain access to the security control room at the palace, which involved a few favors and a few distractions, since your father's always been very strict about who— Yes, okay. And what did he see?
Dex asked, walking back to Ollie. Ollie thumbed at something on his phone.
Elle didn't make it off the property before someone grabbed hold of her last night. Xander thinks he recognizes the guy who took her.
Ollie looked up, and his grim expression left Dex with a sinking feeling in his stomach.
Our vampire friend, Asriel.
Chapter 3. Elle rose from the grogginess of her tangled dreams with the same difficulty as one clawing their way through thick, sticky syrup. It wasn't the first time she'd woken, but it was the first time her mind seemed clear enough to take in her surroundings. Perhaps it was the dull burning pain on the side of her ankle, slowly increasing in intensity, that was helping to cut through the fuzziness of her brain. She blinked repeatedly as she pushed herself up to a sitting position. Her eyes traveled across the richly embroidered bedspread, the ornately carved wooden posts of the four-poster bed, the plush carpet, thick curtains, and abstract art prints. She wasn't sure what she'd expected to wake up to, but this wasn't it. There weren't even any restraints tying her hands or feet together. There was a closed door, though. It must surely be locked. Elle's mind worked slowly back through her most recent memories, hoping to find something that would help her current situation make sense. The Godmother's magic had been pulling her through the air, carrying her back to the attic, and then a vampire had caught hold of her. Asriel. Somehow he'd been strong enough to hold her in place. She remembered struggling, and then there was a flash of pain, and then— nothing. He must have knocked her out, hit her head or something. Since then, she'd woken a few times, but never long enough to make sense of anything. She remembered the burning agony of the slave charm on her ankle, a pain that was oddly subdued at the moment, but definitely growing worse. Asriel's face looming over her, and the sharp prick of something in the crook of her left arm before she fell into oblivion once more. How many times? She had no idea, but it felt like she'd been falling into that dark abyss over and over for an eternity. All while she lay in a luxuriously furnished bedroom. Did vampires treat all their prisoners this way? She pulled her left sleeve up. Holy stars, whose pajamas was she wearing? And looked for needle marks on her arm. She couldn't see any, but that meant nothing. Perhaps Asriel was good at jabbing needles into people without leaving any trace behind. What he wasn't so good at, apparently, was continuing to administer said jabs at regular intervals. Why else should she be awake now? Unless he wanted her to. Her heart jolted at the sound of the doorknob rattling. She instinctively scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go beyond the wall of pillows behind her head. She pushed the bed covers back and scooted to the edge of the bed, silently berating herself for not investigating her options the moment she woke up. There must be a window behind those curtains, and perhaps it wasn't barred. If she was close to ground level, she could— "Why is it locked?" someone shouted on the other side of the door. Elle's feet sank into the carpet, and she pushed away from the bed. A moment later, her vision clouded with white. She lurched toward the window as the floor flew up to meet her hands. "No, no, no," she gasped, shuffling on hands and knees toward the window. At least, she hoped that's the direction she was heading in, but everything was spinning around her and the door was clicking open, and a voice that sent chills down her spine growled,
"It's locked so unwanted visitors can't find their way in." "Elle?" someone else called. "Elle!" That voice. It filled her with warmth, but it was all wrong in this setting. She half turned, half fell, her backside meeting the carpeted floor as strong hands gripped her shoulders. "Dex?" she mumbled, blinking at his familiar silver blue eyes. Maybe she'd never woken up after all. This was another confusing dream filled with the wrong people in the wrong places. Soon Salvia would appear, and then some of Elle's clients, and then—
Yes, there we go, she thought. As the world tilted yet again, Cress's sleek purple hair and flawless face hovered just beyond Dex's. Elle's body sank into the soft mattress and pillows as Dream Dex placed her on the bed, and she heard herself say, I hate playing the fainting damsel, even in my dreams.
You're not a fainting damsel,
Dex said.
You haven't eaten anything in 3 days. That's why your legs won't hold you up.
He smoothed her hair away from her face, kissed her cheek, and said,
I'm so glad we found you.
She tried to reach for him as he pulled away, but the world hadn't quite stopped turning yet, and she saw her hand grasping at empty air somewhere near Dex's head. I wish you were real, she said. It was only about the 100th time she'd said it, maybe the 1000th. How many tangled dreams had Dex managed to find his way into since Asriel had taken her? All of them, however many that was. Dex took her hand, then looked back over his shoulder.
How's it going?
He asked, and Elle realized that Dream Cress was still here too, bending over something near the bottom end of the bed. The pain from the slave charm abruptly disappeared, so perhaps Asriel was jabbing needles into her again, and her brain was trying to protect her by showing Cress and Dex instead.
And you had something for her to drink?
Dex added, still watching Cress. Cress was suddenly right beside Elle, bringing a glass of brown liquid toward her face. Elle thought of trying to knock it away. She wasn't going to willingly drink anything Asriel wanted to force down her throat. But then she caught the scent of it, and she almost started drooling. She couldn't tell what it was, or even if it was sweet or savory, but she wanted to consume it immediately. Wonderful, she thought as Dream Cress tipped the liquid down Elle's throat. Asriel's got me hooked on some kind of drug. Maybe that's why he hasn't bothered tying me up. He knows I won't go anywhere while I'm craving more of this stuff. She relaxed against the pillows, promising herself she would fight harder next time she woke. She would get to the window before anyone came back into the room. She would escape. She didn't need any more of that delicious drink. But as the world slowly righted itself, and Dex and Cress didn't disappear, and a yawning abyss of darkness didn't swallow her whole, Elle began to wonder if she might actually be awake. Dex and Cress peered anxiously at her from either side of the bed. She blinked, staring at one and then the other. Slowly, she pushed herself up a little.
Are you okay?
Dex asked hesitantly. I don't know. Are you real? Dex's face broke into a smile. He leaned closer and pulled her into a tight hug. He was so solid, his arms so firm around her, and he smelled just like the real him, though Elle hadn't realized until this moment that she identified any particular scent as his. You feel real, she mumbled against his shoulder.
I'm definitely real,
he said, laughing into her hair.
And I think you're okay.
You should start to feel stronger soon, Cress added as Dex gently pulled back. You haven't consumed much in days, but that tonic will help a lot. We'll get some food into you soon. But how are you here? Elle asked. Where is here? I'm so confused. Did you catch Asriel? Dex sighed.
We didn't have to. He reached out to us.
Elle blinked and shook her head. I'm still confused.
He never actually wanted to be one of the Allegiant, but he had a good reason. In his eyes, at least, for doing their bidding. And I'll admit I might have done the same thing in his position. But that reason no longer exists for him. He's turned his back on the Allegiant.
Wait, that's what he told you? And you believe him? Dex, this is probably some kind of trap. Dex shook his head.
Ollie and Xander caught him that night you and I ran from the other vamp at the bridge. I questioned Asriel under the influence of a truth spell, and it turns out he doesn't agree with the Allegiant at all. I told him he should work with us instead of against us, but he said he couldn't because they have the woman he loves. Then he escaped us. And then, I guess something changed. He contacted me after the ball. It took him 2 days, since a vampire wanting to have a private conversation with a Fey prince isn't the easiest thing to arrange. He told me he was hiding you here, at his family's home in one of the eternal nights, because of your slave charm and because of that magic that kept pulling you away. Fey spells can't reach through the barrier dividing the normal world from the eternal nights, so he figured you'd be safe here.
So the magic that pulled me away on the night of the ball, Elle said slowly, can't reach me while I'm here.
Correct.
But he's been drugging me, Dex. I've been asleep for however long he's had me here. Because the slave charm was causing you so much pain, Cress said, and he didn't know how to stop it. Oh. Elle thought about that for a moment, but she couldn't remember enough from her hazy interactions with Asriel to know if this might be true.
Asriel explained the situation and told me where to find you.
Dex continued.
We're in the Barrel Eternal Night, which is in Varence. That's why it took me another whole day to get here.
Wait, we're in another country right now? Elle asked. Then she shook her head. Sorry, I suppose we'd have to be if we're in one of the Eternal Nights. There isn't one in Astronerica.
Yes, so I had to organize using my father's plane,
Dex said.
And I had to see Cress so I could ask her to come with. She said she can't remove the slave charm, which I suspected, but she figured she could do something to contain the pain.
Elle leaned forward and took a closer look at her right ankle. Something like transparent plastic wrap covered her skin. The slave charm was still visible, but she realized, for the first time since discovering this wasn't a dream and Dex and Cress were real, that the pain was gone. Oh, wow, thank you. That's amazing.
Elle, that's not all.
Dex shifted a little closer.
I mean, that's not all I wanted to see Cress about. I asked her how to remove a slave charm if I'm not your slave master, and she said I could wish for it with a third-tier wish, so I was going to buy one. My family has essence supplies for emergencies, and I figured I could probably, well, borrow some without anyone noticing. But...
His eyes shifted across the bed toward Cress, but not before Elle caught a glimpse of the desperation in his gaze. It's gone from the catalog, Cress said quietly. Freedom from enslavement charm. It's been removed. It isn't possible to wish for that any longer. But that... how? Elle looked back and forth between Cress and Dex.
My father,
Dex said grimly.
Because of what happened at the ball the other night.
The anti-slavery protest? Elle asked.
Yes. He was furious about it. In fact, he seemed just as upset about humans showing up at his party and starting a protest as he did about vampires sneaking in and trying to kill him. I told him to try to keep things in perspective, but that didn't go down well. He was yelling about humans now posing a security threat instead of simply being a useless nuisance.
Dex grimaced.
Sorry. His words. Definitely not mine.
I know, Elle said, though it still angered her to be considered a useless nuisance.
He still wants to get that law voted in by the National Council, the one that makes the slave charm mandatory for all humans, like it was in the past. But that takes time. However, he suddenly remembered that he's technically supreme head of the Mages Guild.
The what? Elle asked. I didn't know there was a supreme head.
Yes, it's an old title,
Dex said with a dismissive wave of his hand.
It's the same in all Fey-ruled countries. He has nothing to do with the day-to-day running of any of Astronerica's guilds, but he technically has ultimate say over all their policies. That was the last thing I heard him muttering about the morning after the ball, before I managed to get away.
But are you sure it was him who altered the catalog? Elle asked. It wasn't, I don't know, the Godmother? Her magic is powerful. She could probably mess with the catalog if she wanted to. And I wouldn't put it past her to do something like this in retaliation for failing to pay her price, Elle added silently. I placed a query after Dex and I left Vale City, Cress said. I wanted to know if there might be a glitch in the online catalog that meant I wasn't seeing all the available wishes, but I was told, no glitch, King's orders. And the person I spoke to reminded me that no one would miss that wish, since it's hardly ever used. I guess no one expects a slave to be able to purchase a third-tier wish, Elle muttered. I've been saving for years and I still didn't have enough before. Well, it was taken from me.
Of course, the essence,
Dex said.
I didn't make the connection before. That's why you were collecting it. So you could buy a wish. Though you've still never told me what service you provide. Wait.
A deep frown creased his brow.
You said all your essence was taken from you?
My stepmother found it and confiscated it. Elle took a deep breath, looking down at where her hands had begun absently playing with the edge of the bedspread, and added, She's the one who enslaved me.
I know,
Dex growled.
I went looking for you the day after the ball. I used a tracking spell on your shoes, which I found on the stairs outside the front of the palace. The spell took me to your home. I know it was an invasion of your privacy, but something carried you away against your will, and I was so worried.
It's fine, really, Elle assured him. I'm so sorry you had to meet my stepmother.
Hold on, Cress said. Back up. Your stepmother is your slave mistress? Your own family? That's despicable.
Yeah, she turned out to be pretty despicable after my dad died. So that's why I eventually... Elle clenched her teeth together, hating to admit this part out loud. But at some point, Dex would ask her how she'd ended up at the Moonlight Masquerade, and she didn't want to lie. I made a deal with the Godmother.
Wait, you what?
Dex stared at her in horror.
Elle, don't you know how dangerous that is?
Yes, of course I know. That's why it took me this long to summon her. It was never an option before, but then it became the only way. And this isn't just about me. It's about Sienna, too. My stepsister. My stepmother is just as abusive to her as she is to me, so...
Abusive?
Cress repeated sharply. So that's why I need to help her escape, Elle finished. Then she sucked in a breath as she realized something for the first time since waking up. She had never returned home, but Sienna had, which meant Sienna was probably being punished for Elle's disappearance. No, it wasn't supposed to work out this way, she muttered, pushing her fingers through her tangled hair. But wait, she looked at Dex. You said you went to my house. Did you see Sienna?
Yes, and she seemed fine. She told me that if I found you, I must tell you not to worry about her.
Well, of course she'd say that. And just because she looks fine doesn't mean she actually is.
Calm down, Cress said. I can take care of this. You can give me your address before I leave, and I'll go and see Sienna. I'll make sure she really is okay.
Elle breathed out slowly. Okay, thank you.
Elle?
Dex took her hands and laced his fingers between hers.
You made a deal with the Godmother. What was her price?
Whatever it is,
Cress said, looking pointedly at the slave charm.
You clearly haven't paid it yet.
No, I haven't. And I never will. Elle looked into Dex's piercing blue eyes and swallowed before speaking again. Dex, she asked me to kill you. Chapter 4. Elle watched as Dex's mouth slowly dropped open.
What?
He asked, his voice little more than a whisper.
Well, I didn't see that coming,
Cress muttered.
The Godmother wants me dead?
Dex asked. Yes. Elle searched his eyes. Why would she want that? Dex let out a long sigh. He looked away, his hands slipping free of Elle's.
She must have found out.
Found out what?
That I planned to kill her.
Elle's eyes widened.
Wow. Okay. I guess I can see why she might want to take you out first then. Can I ask why you plan to kill her?
Dex looked at Cress and tilted his head ever so slightly toward the door.
Well, this is a very interesting conversation, Cress said. But I think you two need to continue it alone. I'm going to find our host. I see he disappeared very quickly after letting us in here.
She rose from the edge of the bed.
I wonder if he can find us some food,
she added as she made for the door.
Or if I'm naive to think a vampire's pantry might have anything other than blood bags. Blood bags, Elle repeated with a shiver. That was a disturbing thought.
So that's why you were at the ball,
Dex said quietly.
I wondered, but I didn't get the chance to ask before that magic took you from me.
Yes, that's why I was there. The Godmother dressed me up and told me to go and kill the prince. I didn't know you were the prince, of course. I never would have agreed to her price if I'd known.
Dex frowned. But you were happy to agree when he was just a faceless person. You were willing to—
No, I was never planning to kill anyone. I told the Godmother I would, but I never actually meant it. I knew I would have to pretend somehow. I sent a message to Cress, and she made me a potion that simulates death, so it would appear, for a short time, that I'd killed him. That's what I gave to the guy everyone thought was you. Your body double.
I see. I heard something about him being unconscious after the ball, and I assumed he'd been hit with something during the vampire attack. But I don't think he ever appeared to be dead.
Maybe because of the champagne? Elle said. You mentioned there were protective charms?
Dex nodded. Yes, that might have helped him.
In the awkward quiet that followed, Elle looked around and noticed a half-full glass of brown liquid on the nightstand beside the bed. Is that the tonic Cress gave me?
Oh, yes, you should probably drink the rest of it.
Dex reached for the glass and handed it to Elle. She sniffed, took a sip, then said, Sweet.
What's that?
I couldn't decide before, when I was close to passing out, if it was sweet or savory. All I knew was that it tasted delicious. I still can't figure out what it is, but it's definitely on the sweet side.
Okay.
She took another few sips, watching him closely. So, she said eventually, why do you want to kill the Godmother? Dex exhaled slowly.
Because of a wish?
He looked away before continuing.
Years ago, my father made a wish. He wished that no one would ever be able to take the throne from him. But the wish went wrong, or so I've always been told. My parents said it was an illegal wish, and that's why it backfired. They have plenty of essence with which to buy legitimate wishes, but apparently this was the kind of wish that couldn't be bought. The Mages Guild said it was impossible. My father might be able to add and remove wishes from the catalog, but only wishes that are actually possible.
Yeah, I guess ultimate power isn't the kind of thing that should be possible to wish for, Elle murmured.
Exactly. So, my father told me he bought this wish from one of the illegal suppliers, someone who said he'd had partial training at the Mages Guild before being asked to leave because he was too powerful. I always thought my father was stupid to fall for a story like that. Anyway, he used the wish, but it backfired. Something about the unstable magic of the wish's core being set free and latching onto my brother and me, with horrible side effects.
Side effects? Elle asked.
Yes. Anyway, it turns out that nothing my father told me about that wish was true. He accidentally let part of the truth slip out a few months ago, and after that he had to tell me the full story. He didn't buy that wish from anyone.
Dex's brow pulled lower as his expression darkened.
My father bargained with the Godmother. He knew there would be a price, but she wouldn't tell him what. Only that it would reveal itself in time and that it was a terrible price. She asked if he was still willing to pay it without knowing what it was. He said yes, never imagining how truly terrible it would be. But the Godmother knew. She decided on the price. She caused unimaginable pain for my family, and for thousands of others who've bargained with her and had to pay a terrible price. And that's why I want her dead. She shouldn't get to play around with people's lives.
Though she had a feeling she may already know the answer, she asked, "What was the price, Dex?" His eyes met hers.
The darkness.
He answered quietly. Is that what killed your brother?"
Yes.
"So you—" Her words were barely a whisper now, and she couldn't finish the sentence. But it seemed Dex knew what she was trying to say.
Yes.
He answered again.
One day, probably not too long from now, it will take me too.
Elle was already shaking her head. She leaned to the side and returned the glass of tonic to the nightstand. "That can't be true. There must be a way to stop it. Surely Cress, or someone even more knowledgeable than her can find something. Some spell or potion?" Dex shook his head.
It's slowly eating away at me. The Astaleaf potion Cress makes for me keeps those episodes at bay. You know, where my eyes go dark and shadows move across my skin. But it's still there inside me, weakening me ever so slowly. My brother grew weaker and weaker until eventually he passed away. And the same will happen to me. My father wished that no one would take the throne from him, and apparently that included his own sons.
But can't your father try to undo the bargain?
He and my mother have both tried to wish away the darkness. But the Godmother's price was to take away the power she granted him, and apparently that was too high a price for them to pay.
What?
What you saw at the ball the other night, when a vampire tried to directly attack my father, and all that magic mixed in with dark shadows radiated away from him, killing all the vampires in the ballroom? That was a result of the wish he made. If he'd successfully undone that wish, he might have been killed the other night. A fact he was kind enough to remind me of after the ball, as if I should be grateful that I'm the one who has to suffer so he can survive any attempt on his life.
"That's horrible," Elle whispered. "How can your own father suggest something like that to you?" Dex pressed his lips together and shrugged. "So does the continuation of the Belmont line mean nothing to him?" Elle asked. "If you and your brother are both gone, then your father has no heirs. Is there some distant relative who might inherit the throne? Or will Fae from the other noble houses end up fighting over it? Surely your father would rather have one of his sons continue his legacy than to simply be king for as long as possible before dying, and then that's it." Dex sighed.
That brings us to the ball and the fact that my father is desperate for me to marry. There is no one else in our family to inherit the throne. When he dies of natural causes one day, another house will rule. The Belmont line will be over. He decided long ago not to part with the power he was granted, and instead pin his hopes on one or both of his sons marrying and having children. He hopes the next generation will be free of this curse the Godmother placed upon us.
But he might be wrong.
He might be. And I don't want to inflict that kind of suffering on my own wife and child. And that's why I shouldn't have kissed you, Elle. That's why I shouldn't be getting close to anyone.
Elle blinked. Oh. That kiss was one of the most marvelous things that had ever happened to her, and now Dex was telling her he regretted it?
I mean, I wanted to,
he added quickly.
Very much. And that's why I did. But I shouldn't have. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you're human. That really doesn't matter to me. I'd marry you no matter what race you were. I mean...
His eyes widened and his cheeks turned visibly pink.
A long way down the line, if it turned out we both loved each other, and if I wasn't going to die because of this stupid darkness, and if you actually wanted to marry me.
He pushed one hand through his hair and muttered,
"Stop rambling, idiot." Anyway,
he gave Elle a strained smile.
What I'm trying to say is that I shouldn't have encouraged anything between the two of us because one day, possibly soon, I'll be gone, and that isn't fair to you.
Oh. Elle nodded slowly, but a frown crept onto her face. What if I disagree?
You disagree?
I'm sorry, you probably don't hear that very often. Being a prince and everything, there's probably a law or something that says people can't disagree with you. Dex gave her a wry smile.
Fortunately not. Xander and Ollie disagree with me all the time, and they make sure I know it. Especially Xander.
Well, then, I disagree with you. You don't get to decide what's unfair to me, and you don't get to give up on finding a cure for this darkness thing. Dex sighed.
Elle.
No. She shook her head. You might not know this about me yet because we only just met, but I don't give up. I've always believed I'd find a way out of my own horrible situation, and I believe the same for you. And don't tell me I'm naive because I've had my fair share of major disappointments. I know the world sucks and plenty of people don't get their happy ending, but I refuse to accept that for myself, and now I refuse to accept it for you. Dex stared at her. His lips twitched, and Elle got the feeling he was trying to hold back a smile.
You're making this really hard,
he said. This?
Yeah.
He added no further explanation, but his gaze darted to her lips before moving back up, and Elle realized with a rush of heat that she knew what he was talking about. I see. Well, let me make it easier for you. Before she could lose her nerve, she reached out, grabbed a fistful of Dex's sweater, and pulled him closer. She pressed her lips to his, half expecting him not to respond, maybe even to push her away. But a second later, his hands were in her hair, and she felt him shifting closer on the bed. She wasn't thinking about a one-day-in-the-future marriage, or even a Fey prince boyfriend. Allowing those thoughts to take hold might have paralyzed her. All she focused on was Dex, the guy she'd bumped into one night outside a club, the guy whose beautiful eyes never left her imagination, the guy who'd traveled into an eternal night to find her. She loosened her grip on Dex's sweater, spreading her hand flat against his chest and feeling the beat of his heart against her palm. His hand slid down her back and pulled her closer, wrapping her in his strong embrace as their kiss deepened. Her blood rushed dizzyingly fast through her veins, undoing the strengthening, steadying effect of the tonic, but Elle let herself fall into it, not caring whether she knew up from down as long as Dex's arms were around her. As he kissed her chin and neck, she managed to find the breath to say, "You're not very good at the whole I shouldn't encourage anything between us idea."
I know.
His lips moved along her jaw to the sensitive skin beneath her ear.
I usually am, but with you, I don't know.
He kissed her earlobe.
Apparently, I have zero self-control.
It seemed that wasn't entirely true, though, because he managed to pull away for long enough that Elle opened her eyes, blinked, and focused on his conflicted expression.
I'm so sorry,
he said.
I shouldn't have let myself.
Dex, if you don't care that I'm human,
I don't.
And you don't care that I'm not only a commoner but also a slave,
Nobody is worth anything less simply because someone decided to enslave them.
And the possibility that you might die at some point in the near future is the only thing holding you back?
It's quite a big thing.
Then I'm sorry, but you can't get rid of me. She kissed him again, wanting to lose herself in a moment where vampires and slave charms and godmothers didn't matter. But she couldn't keep reality from creeping in at the edge of her mind, and it wasn't long before the heat in her veins began to cool, and their kisses slowed. And then her head was resting against Dex's shoulder as his arms remained securely wrapped around her. She stared unseeingly at the curtains, listening to Dex's steady breathing and trying to decide on which of the many questions running through her mind she should ask first. "So," she said eventually, "if I leave this eternal night, will my stepmother be able to find me?"
Unfortunately, yes. Whatever magic Cress applied to your leg, it was only to keep the pain at bay.
She said she couldn't figure out how to hide a slave from his or her master. The fact that we're technically in a different realm right now is all that's hiding you from your stepmother.
So I have to stay here.
Just until we can figure something else out. And you said you don't give up, right? Which means we'll find something. We have to. Elle nodded, her cheek brushing against Dex's shoulder.
At least there's no pain anymore.
Yeah, about that. Dex removed his arms from around Elle and sat back. Cress said her spell won't work permanently. That transparent stuff she put around your ankle will slowly be absorbed into your skin, probably over the space of a few days, and then the pain will return. She'll have to do the spell again, and she thinks it might get less effective the more she does it.
Wonderful,
Elle muttered. She pushed her hands through her hair.
So what's happening back home in Vale City? What have I missed since the ball? Is the Allegiant threat over?
No. A voice answered from the doorway, and a chill of fear rushed across Elle's skin as her eyes darted toward Asriel. Savoy is still alive, he said. And that means the threat is definitely not over.
Chapter 5. Asriel stepped into the room, and Elle realized he was carrying a plate with some sandwiches on it. Cress walked in behind him.
We didn't have any food when I first brought you here,
Asriel said.
The house hasn't been used in a while, but my sister made sure to pick up a few things after I told her you were here.
Sister? Elle asked, unable to keep from leaning away as Asriel moved closer. I'm hoping she was the one who put me in these pajamas and not you.
Yes, you've met her before. At that celebrity party. She was trying to keep you away from me.
Oh, Alyssa? She's your sister?
Yes.
Asriel stopped beside the bed and held the plate toward Elle. She hesitated, eyeing the entirely normal-looking sandwiches with suspicion.
I understand if you don't trust me,
he said.
After our last few interactions. But I assure you it wasn't personal.
So I heard, Elle said as she reached slowly for the plate. Still, you would have done anything to me that the Allegiant asked.
Yes, for a good reason.
Elle gave him a questioning look. And now that reason doesn't exist anymore? And we're supposed to believe you? Asriel paused, then walked past the bed to the curtains. He pulled one aside a few inches, peered out, then let the thick fabric fall back into place as he turned to face Elle, folding his arms across his chest.
Fine. I'll tell you. Hopefully then you'll understand. I was part of an army of vampires. We were experimented on. Enhanced. We're stronger and faster than normal vampires. The man who owned this army had a daughter, and I fell in love with her. She loved me too, and together we plotted to escape. We managed to free the entire army. But then she went missing. Word reached me that the vampire heir Vincenzo Savoy had caught her. He refused to free her unless I worked for him. So, I decided to do what he asked. I pretended I was loyal to his cause, though I'm sure he saw right through that. I even tried, at one point, to convince myself that maybe the Allegiant were right, that Savoy should be king of Astronerica. After all, his family did rule that country centuries ago. But I couldn't convince myself. In certain parts of the world, there are vampire rulers who are good, but Savoy is not one of them. He should never be ruler over anything.
But you did what he asked anyway, Elle said quietly.
Yes, because of Muriel. When you love someone...
He shook his head and sighed.
Love is supposed to be good, but it can make you do terrible things. I tracked you down. I tried, as you know, to catch you. After the last time I failed, Savoy told me I'd run out of time to prove myself. He wanted to get rid of me. I tried to run, determined that this time I would get hold of you. I would hand you over to Savoy and finally free Mariel. But there were others from the army I'd helped free, working for him. They caught me. They threw me down in front of Mariel, and I saw that she wasn't in chains. She wasn't confined in any way. She told me the truth then, that she'd never loved me. She'd used me to help her get the army away from her father so she could sell us to Savoy and take the full payment for herself. Some of us did manage to escape, myself included, but she handed everyone else over to Savoy. And then, because of my stupidity, I ended up working for him anyway.
So, you must have got away from him, Elle said quietly. If you ended up finding me and bringing me here.
Yes, something inside me snapped. I realized everything I'd done for Savoy was because of a lie. My fury. Well, I suppose it gave me even more strength. I fought the others off and got away. Didn't they have magic?
Dex asked.
No. Savoy was keeping his magic-empowered vampires aside for the ball. They were all volunteers. He won't give his special enhanced army any magic until he knows he can do it properly.
So you got away, and then you just happened to find me outside the palace? Elle asked.
I couldn't find your home. It seemed to have somehow been hidden from me. I couldn't even find the street. I knew you'd gotten yourself involved with a Fey prince somehow, so I figured it made sense to check out the ball.
Why come looking for me anyway? Asriel gave her a puzzled look.
To keep Savoy from catching you? Those vampires he sent to the ball had magic, but it wouldn't have lasted. If they'd survived the ball, they would probably now be suffering in agony as the magic left their bodies. Then they'd have to do the ritual again. Whatever the process is that Savoy keeps putting them through, it isn't complete. He needs you for that. That's why he's been looking for you all this time.
Elle shook her head. Why? I know absolutely nothing about giving vampires magic.
I don't know.
And what does my mother have to do with any of this? Asriel frowned again.
Your mother?
Elle squeezed fistfuls of the bed covers in her hands, adrenaline racing through her body now that she finally had the chance to ask Asriel the question she'd wanted to ask since he first abducted her. She tried to keep me from you. That's what you said when you dragged me from that club and took me to the fairground.
Oh, yes. Well, she didn't keep you from me, specifically. I think I must have said us. And by us, I mean Savoy and the rest of his allegiant. All I know is that there was an incident of some sort. Many years ago. You and your mother were there, along with Savoy and his father, Nazario Savoy. I wasn't told precisely what happened, but by the time you and your mother fled, Savoy Sr. was dead.
Elle's heart pounded uncomfortably fast in her chest. And Savoy, Vincenzo Savoy, didn't say how his father died?
No, but I assume your mother did something. You were just a child at the time, so I doubt it was you.
Elle nodded slowly, Asriel's voice fading into the background as the godmother's words slammed into her, as clear as if she were in the room uttering them out loud.
Your power doesn't simply remove memories. If you take it further, if you remove all memories, if you remove the mind itself, The body cannot survive on its own. And then the most shocking part of all. You've done it before. Elle shoved the possibility away. She didn't know if the godmother had been lying. And even if she told the truth, it probably wasn't a vampire she'd been talking about. Someone like Nazario Savoy, a man working to take back the throne of Astronerica, would never have let his guard down long enough for Elle to get into his mind.
Elle?
Asriel said, startling her from her thoughts. Yes, sorry? What did you say?
Savoy, the current Savoy, told me you took something vitally important that day. I asked if you know what that might be.
Something in his gaze suggested he thought Elle should know what he was talking about. I have no idea, she answered.
Really? Well, he desperately wants it back. He's been searching for you for years, but your mother kept you hidden. When I ended up working for him, he told me everything he could remember about you and your mother, and I was tasked with tracking you down. He told me about the strange, unnatural ability you possess. It was that which eventually led me to you.
A strange, unnatural ability? Dex asked. Mild surprise crossed Asriel's face.
You haven't told him?
Told me what? Dex asked, but Elle's focus remained on Asriel. So you don't know anything else? She asked. Nothing about how my mother originally got herself involved with vampires?
No, that's the only information I was told. Elle, what is he?
Can we talk about that part later? She asked Dex. She had too much to process right now. She might have killed a vampire. At the very least, she'd taken something from him. And that something was probably a memory. If so, Savoy's hunt for her was useless. Once she'd wiped a memory, it was gone.
Okay,
Dex said slowly.
Sure, we can talk later.
But his brow remained creased as he watched her.
Tell me about this ritual that gives magic to vampires,
Cress said, perching on the edge of Elle's bed.
I've never heard of such a thing. And you,
she looked at Elle,
should be eating right now.
Oh, right. Though she felt far from hungry right now, Elle lifted one of the sandwiches and sniffed it.
It's safe,
Cress assured her.
I made it myself.
The ritual? She prodded, her gaze turning back to Asriel. Elle took a bite of the sandwich. Ham, cheese, tangy mustard, and a few salad items. As Asriel said,
I don't know the details.
How convenient, Dex muttered, looping one arm around a bedpost at the foot of the bed.
There seem to be a lot of details you aren't aware of. Cast another one of your truth spells if you must,
Asriel said.
You'll soon learn I'm not lying. All I know is that humans are required, and there's some ritual or process the humans must first undergo on their own before they can be used to give magic to a vampire. But how any of it works, I have no idea. I'm not exactly on Savoy's list of most trusted confidants. So that explains all the recent human abductions,
Dex said.
Yes, and as long as Savoy is still alive, humans will continue to disappear, and he'll keep giving magic to more vampires. And that,
he looked at Elle,
is why the threat is not over. This is going to be such a mess,
Dex muttered.
My father wants to wipe out any remaining allegiant, and Savoy as soon as possible. He doesn't care if he has to start another war. Now that he knows about them, he wants them all dead.
Elle finished chewing her current mouthful of sandwich and looked at Dex. Didn't he know about the Allegiant before?
No, not until a few days ago. He was vaguely aware of all the human abductions, but he didn't care about those. And the police were taking too long to find answers, so I decided to start investigating on my own. Well, with Ollie and Xander. I warned my father before the ball, but he wouldn't take me seriously. Perhaps he did believe me, but he didn't care enough to cancel the ball. He knows no one can take the throne from him, and I suppose he thought a bit of extra security would keep everyone else safe. When you say no one can take the throne from him,
Asriel said, tilting his head a little to the side.
Do you mean that literally, or is it simply your father's sheer arrogance? I mean it literally.
Dex sighed.
He wished for it.
Asriel's eyebrows rose a fraction.
The Godmother? Yes. Well, since the Godmother doesn't deal with vampires, I'm fairly certain Savoy has made no such wish. Right, so my father should be able to defeat him. I'm just worried about the number of people who'll have to die in the process. Your father can only defeat him if he knows where to find him. True, but he already has a lead on Savoy's last known whereabouts. I doubt it,
Asriel said. A beat of silence passed in which Elle looked between him and Dex. She waited for Asriel to elaborate, but he remained silent.
I assume you know where he is?
Dex pressed.
I do. One of the Eternal Nights, correct?
Dex asked.
Somewhere the Fae can't enter without vampire assistance, like this one. I couldn't have entered here if you hadn't met me at the border and allowed me to cross. But my father has a few vampires in his employ. Crossing into an Eternal Night won't be a problem for him. And if most people in the world aren't even aware of the existence of this particular Eternal Night where Savoy currently resides?
Asriel asked. Elle watched Dex's brow furrow.
How is that possible?
Asriel's laugh was devoid of humor.
Because the Fae think they already know everything, and the rest of us are happy to let you continue believing that.
Okay, look,
Cress said.
the two of you might have all day to dance around this issue, but I don't. Are you going to tell us where this mysterious, uncharted Eternal Night is or not?
I am not,
Asriel said.
Come on,
Dex groaned.
Seriously? You want to let Savoy go on happily creating a magic-wielding vampire army? So that one night they can all race into Vale City, kill whoever's in their path, and then wind up dead when they try to kill my father?
Asriel narrowed his eyes.
No, I don't want that. But neither do I want to give up a secret that vampires have kept for centuries. Basically, I'm stepping away from the situation now.
He held his hands up in a show of surrender.
I've helped where I can. I brought Elle to a safe location so Savoy can't find her. And now I'm staying out of things.
He looked at Elle.
If you need to stay here, that's fine. But beyond providing safe haven, I'm not getting involved any further. So you're choosing the coward's way out,
Dex muttered. A growl rumbled in Asriel's throat. The kind of sound Elle would have expected to hear from a wolf shifter rather than a vampire.
Don't you dare.
Dex, I think we should go,
Cress interrupted, rising from the bed.
We've been cut off from communication with the rest of the world for several hours now. I have responsibilities at the apothecary, and you have no idea if your parents may have been trying to contact you.
Dex exhaled sharply.
Cress, we haven't decided on a course of action yet. And Elle and I...
He looked at her.
We have things to talk about.
I know, but we both need to get back now that you've confirmed Elle is okay and it's fine for her to stay here. That is, unless you'd like to piss off her host to the point where he takes back his invitation.
Elle paused with the last sandwich raised halfway to her mouth. She didn't think her eyebrows could rise any higher. Apparently, Cress was just as willing as Xander and Ollie to make it known when she disagreed with Prince Dex.
It's fine,
Asriel grumbled before Dex could answer Cress.
Elle can stay here. When you're done saying your goodbyes, you know where to find me so I can show you out.
He stalked past the bed and left the room. Elle let go of the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For a moment there, I thought things were about to get ugly.
I'm sorry,
Dex said.
It's just that we need his help.
Do we? Cress asked. Isn't it better if your father doesn't know where to find Savoy? We don't exactly want to encourage a war.
But someone needs to keep Savoy from turning all his enhanced vampires into enhanced vampires with magic.
I don't know what to say, Dex, Cress answered. I don't know the best way to fix this problem, but remaining in this eternal night any longer isn't going to help us. We need to return to Vale City. You took your father's plane without his authorization, which means he's probably trying to contact you right now to find out what's going on.
I doubt it,
Dex muttered.
He probably hasn't even noticed I'm gone. And my forgery skills are excellent. No one questioned any of the authorization papers I handed over.
Dex, Elle admonished, is that how you got here? You're going to land yourself in serious trouble. My point exactly, Cress said. And I don't want to wind up in trouble along with you, so it's definitely time to go. Whatever you and Elle need to talk about, you can save it for when you next see her. Yeah, we can do that, Elle said. She needed to tell Dex the truth at some point about her strange ability, and the service she offered to clients, and all the horrible cons Salvia had forced her to participate in, but she didn't mind putting it off a little longer. Oh, wait, one of you will come back at some point, right? Or you'll send Ollie or Xander if that's less trouble? I know I have to stay here right now because of the slave charm, but I don't want to be here forever.
Of course I'll come back,
Dex said. He took her hand and laced his fingers between hers.
Cress can show me the spell she used on your ankle, so I can get rid of the pain when it returns. And we'll figure out this slave charm thing, even if I have to negotiate with your stepmother in order to—
Oh, no, Elle interrupted hastily. Don't do that. Just stay away from her.
Okay. Then we'll figure something else out. I'm just not sure when exactly I'll be able to come back. And I won't be able to let you know, since communication from the outside world into an eternal night isn't possible.
Elle nodded. That's okay. I understand. At the sight of Dex's guilty expression, she added, It's fine. It really is. She gestured to the room around her and added, Things could definitely be worse. At least I'm not a prisoner in an attic. Cress narrowed her eyes. I look forward to sharing a few words with your stepmother when I go to check up on Sienna. She rubbed her hands together until, with a spark of gold dust, a small notebook and a pen appeared on one palm. Please write down your address for me. Oh, actually, that might not be the best way to go about things. Elle reached for the notepad. I was thinking you should probably go to Sienna's school. At home, she won't tell you if she's really okay. She'll be too afraid of my stepmother overhearing something. But if you find her at school, and you tell her I sent you, hopefully she'll be honest about if things are still bad at home. Cress hesitated, then said, Okay, perhaps that's a better place to start. One step at a time. Thanks. Elle quickly wrote down the address of Sienna's school, then handed the notepad and pen back to Cress. Oh, and I know this is a lot to ask, but actually, never mind. Just ask, Cress said with a sigh. I can decide if it's too much. Okay. If Sienna's happy to meet you a second time, can you ask her to bring some things for me? My father's pocket watch necklace and the quilt my mother made, and the photo album from inside my wardrobe. Cress raised an eyebrow.
An entire quilt?
I know. If it's too much to ask for her to sneak all of that out of the house, then she doesn't need to worry. It's just that those are the only things I have left from my parents, and
I'll see what I can do,
Cress said. Thank you,
I'm so sorry we have to leave you here alone,
Dex said. His hand squeezed Elle's, and he moved a little closer. Though there were far more important things to be concerned about at this point, Elle's heart leaped into high gear at the thought that he might be about to kiss her in front of Cress.
But I think we can trust Asriel,
he continued.
He wouldn't have.
She won't be here alone, a female voice said from the direction of the door. Elle turned toward the voice and saw a woman she recognized. Dark hair, ivory skin, and a smile curving one side of her lips, leaning casually against the doorframe. Alyssa, she said. You remember me? Alyssa looked pleased as she pushed away from the doorframe and entered the room. Of course I remember you. I'm still not sure if you were trying to help me or trick me that night at Gisella's party. I was trying to help you, of course. I knew Asriel was after you, and I didn't want him handing you over to that vampire savage, Savoy. Dex took a step toward the door and blocked Alyssa's path forward.
You attacked me,
he said.
Twice.
Twice? Elle asked, leaning sideways to see Alyssa's reaction.
The second time was at Xander's house,
Dex said.
After we captured Asriel. She knocked me unconscious and helped him escape.
It was actually my friend who hit you on the head, Alyssa clarified. And if you cast your mind back, Your Highness, you'll remember that right before it happened, I said I didn't want to hurt you. And I meant that. You and I are not on opposite sides. But my family comes first, and that's why I had to help Asriel. Fortunately, he no longer has any ties to the Allegiant. That means he isn't trying to capture Elle, you aren't trying to capture him, and I don't have to try and keep you all apart. We can all be friends now. She stepped sideways, and in a rush of motion almost too fast to follow, she ended up on the bed beside Elle. Dex spun around to face her.
Was that really necessary?
Don't worry, Prince Chevalier. Or is it Prince Dex? She looped an arm around Elle's shoulder and gave Dex a wide, innocent smile. I'll take good care of Elle. Whatever it is Savoy wants from her, he won't be getting it. Chapter 6. You know, Elle said to Alyssa once Dex and Cress had left, when you said you'd take good care of me, it sounded a little bit like a threat. Alyssa laughed, removed her arm from around Elle's shoulders, and leaned back against the pillows. I know, but your prince knows I didn't mean it that way. He wouldn't have left you here if he didn't trust me. She cocked her head to one side, her dark hair spilling across a cream-colored pillowcase. Would you like to take a bath? Elle frowned. Are you saying I smell bad? Not at all. I've been putting you in fresh pajamas every day, and I spritzed your hair with enduring rose, that scent that everyone's going nuts about right now. Nobody wants to take care of a smelly patient. Elle clutched a handful of her tangled blonde waves and sniffed, noting that her hair did indeed smell faintly like roses. That's weird, she muttered. But thanks, I guess. You're welcome. I'm sure Prince Not So Charming appreciated it too, which, of course, was the main reason I made sure you didn't smell as stinky as you no doubt feel. Elle's skin flushed. Thanks again? Don't mention it. Anyway, I thought you might want to have a bath because your body's probably achy and uncomfortable from lying in a bed for so long, and because a hot, soaking bath filled with mounds of bubbles is one of life's greatest pleasures. And I say that as someone who's lived a long time. Okay. Alyssa sat up and pushed herself off the bed. You clearly haven't experienced enough of them if you disagree with me. Elle's mind jumped to the tiny shower in the makeshift bathroom section of her attic back home. Let's just say it's been a while. Well, come on then. Alyssa headed for the door. "I'll show you where the nearest bathroom is." "Okay, thanks." Elle climbed off the bed and followed her, bare feet padding silently across the carpeted floor. Out in the hallway, they passed numerous closed doors before reaching the end and turning left. "Is this a large house?" she asked. Alyssa laughed. "Remember that celebrity home we were in when Asriel tried to catch you?" "This house is that big?" "Not quite. And the artwork isn't as disturbing as that weird thumb sculpture we saw, but this home is unnecessarily large. I think my parents went a little overboard when they designed this place. The library probably could have been a bit smaller." "There's a library?" "Overkill, right? Anyway, here's the bathroom." She flicked a switch on the wall before sweeping into a room almost the size of Elle's whole attic. Marbled gray and white tiles, glossy enough to see one's reflection in, covered the floor, and in the center of the room stood an enormous oval-shaped bathtub. The shower took up one entire wall, while on the opposite side of the bathroom there was no wall at all. A pane of glass stretching from floor to ceiling separated the bathroom from the outside world, a landscape of leafless trees and jagged mountain peaks. The sky held neither moon nor stars, yet the land wasn't shrouded in complete darkness the way Elle had imagined. Dim light of some sort illuminated the landscape, though she couldn't figure out its source. "This is... wow," was all she could say. Alyssa leaned down into the bath and pressed a plug into place, then opened both taps. "Yes, it's nice to have the view to look at while you're contemplating life. And don't worry, no one can see you from out there." She crossed to the cabinet beneath a pair of oval basins standing atop the vanity and retrieved a bottle. Elle watched as she removed the cap, tipped the bottle upside down over the bath, and poured blue liquid into the stream of gushing water. "So you seem to have found yourself in quite an inconvenient situation," Alyssa continued, screwing the cap back onto the bottle. Elle moved closer to the bath and looked down at the mounds of bubbles gathering beneath the heavy stream of water. "Being stuck in a world of everlasting darkness because it's the only way my stepmother can't find me? Yeah, definitely inconvenient." Alyssa looked up. "I was actually referring to your love life." "My what?" She returned the bottle to the cabinet before leaning against the vanity. "Human slave falls in love with fey prince. You haven't exactly made things easy for yourself." "Falls in love? No. Elle forced a laugh. "I am not in love. This is more of a, like a crush." "I see. Well, that's a little embarrassing for Prince Chevalier Adex Norville Belmont." "It is?" "I'd say it's definitely more than a crush for him. The guy took his father's plane without permission, flew to a different country, and crossed the border into an eternal night. Not the safest of places for a non-vampire. Just to make sure you're okay." "Well, I guess he cares?" Alyssa raised an eyebrow and gave her a look that said, "Duh." "So, Elle focused on the bubbles again. "That's really horrible for Asriel. The fact that the woman he loves turned out to be using him. He must be heartbroken." Alyssa sighed. "Yeah, he's not exactly in a good place right now. Then again, he hasn't been in a good place for a long time." Elle cast her mind back to the story Asriel had shared. "He mentioned he was experimented on, forced to be part of some kind of enhanced army. Is that why he has that tattoo on his neck? The barcode?" "No, that's..." Alyssa paused and looked away. "That's from before. He doesn't like to talk about it." "Oh, okay." The level of the bubbles had almost reached the top of the bath, so Elle leaned over and turned the taps off. "Asriel said he won't tell us where this other eternal night is," she said to Alyssa as she straightened. "The one where Savoy is hiding?" "I know." Elle took a deep breath and decided to try her luck. Do you know where it is? Alyssa hesitated before answering.
I do.
Elle's heart sank as she recognized the reluctance in Alyssa's tone. But you also don't want to tell us. Alyssa sighed.
The location of the uncharted Eternal Nights is a secret vampires have kept for centuries. It goes against everything in us to reveal this information to another one of the high races. You're not supposed to know that any uncharted Eternal Nights even exist.
Elle let out a long breath. I understand.
But I plan to talk to Asriel about this,
Alyssa added.
Perhaps we can still help your prince without actually telling him the location.
You mean like blindfolding him and leading him there? Alyssa smiled.
Maybe. But you definitely wouldn't be allowed on that trip, I'm afraid. We need to keep you far away from Savoy.
She pushed away from the vanity.
Anyway, enjoy the bath. The towels are over there.
She pointed to a collection of fluffy white towels hanging over a rail on one side of the shower.
I'll find some clothes for you and leave them outside the door. Come downstairs when you're ready, and I'll show you around.
She crossed the bathroom, stopped in the doorway, and reached back for the doorknob. Alyssa? She looked up, her hand pausing in the air.
Yes?
Why exactly do you want to keep me from Savoy? I mean, you're a vampire, and he's trying to figure out how to give magic to your kind. Even if you don't want him specifically to have that kind of power, surely you want it for yourself and other vampires. This is magic we're talking about. The glittery, gold, full of potential kind. Not just the simple kind that allows shifters to change shape and gives vampires their abilities. Aren't you at all tempted by that? Alyssa looked away, slowly lowering her hand to her side. She remained silent for several moments before saying,
The thought of being able to do all the amazing things the Fae can do, it is tempting. I'll admit, very tempting. But I don't know enough about the process, and the fact that humans are utilized disturbs me. If they were volunteers, the same way humans can volunteer their blood to vampires or ask to be turned, that would be different. But I'm about 1,000% certain that's not the case here. These humans disappear and never turn up again. This process is probably something that kills them, and I'm one of the many vampires who's not okay with that. I believe the 4 high races are all equal, and one shouldn't have to die in order to give another more power.
So, you're not just keeping me here until you and Asriel can get rid of Savoy, and then you can use whatever knowledge I apparently possess, which I don't, by the way, to complete this ritual and give magic to yourselves and anyone else you deem worthy? Alyssa's mouth fell open.
Is that really what you think?
Elle spread her hands wide and gave a helpless shrug. I don't know what to think. I'm trying to understand things from your perspective. You're being so nice to me, so obviously I want to figure out the reason. Unless, is it possible you're just being nice for the sake of being nice? Alyssa looked genuinely confused.
It's just plain decency, isn't it?
Then her eyes darted down for a moment, somewhere near Elle's leg, and understanding replaced her confusion.
Which I suppose you haven't experienced much of in your life.
She smiled and added,
Hopefully that'll change soon.
Then she reached again for the doorknob and pulled the door closed. Despite wanting to take Alyssa at her word, Elle remained still for a moment, listening for a key turning in the lock. But no sound reached her ears other than the faint pop of the bubbles sitting in her bath. She let out a long breath as her shoulders relaxed. Perhaps it was naive, but she felt instinctively that Alyssa was being truthful. Elle removed her pajamas and stepped carefully into the bathtub. She lowered herself into the hot water, her eyes sliding shut as she sank down until the bubbles covered her shoulders. Bliss. But her busy mind wouldn't leave her alone. And so, with her eyes still closed and a cocoon of bubbles surrounding her, she allowed herself to consider a terrifying possibility. Not only had she wiped away memories, she had wiped away a life. Chapter 7. 3 days later, Elle was seriously starting to miss the sun. Even while stuck in her attic back home, she'd been able to enjoy the bright rays filtering in through her dusty little window. Well, enjoy probably wasn't the right word. Hanging out in Asriel and Alyssa's beautiful family home was certainly more enjoyable, though she felt a little as if she existed in a state of limbo. It was frustrating not knowing what was going on with Dex, or if Sienna was okay, or whether Vale City had been overrun by magical vampires.
It'll be a while before that happens,
Asriel assured her multiple times, but she still hated feeling so detached from the real world. She looked up from the book she'd been trying to focus on as Alyssa walked into the lounge and dropped onto the couch beside her. "Finished work?" Elle asked.
Yes,
Alyssa answered with a sigh.
It's Friday, and it's wine o'clock. I'm done for the week.
Though Alyssa's family had plenty of wealth, her parents were currently traveling overseas and hadn't been home for almost a year, and Alyssa had amassed her own small fortune from the various occupations her long life had allowed her to try out. She apparently liked to keep herself busy. Currently, she worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant it had been easy enough for her to leave her fancy Cavalli Avenue apartment for a few days and work from her parents' home, so Elle wasn't left alone with a grumpy Asriel. "I've always wanted to know," Elle said, "if vampires actually enjoy the taste of things other than blood, or whether you consume normal food and drink in public just because it's more socially acceptable."
Oh, wine is still quite delicious,
Alyssa said, leaning her elbow on the back of the couch and twirling a strand of hair around her finger.
As are plenty of other foods. They just don't provide any sustenance for us the way they do for other races. Blood is the only thing that's necessary for us to consume.
She turned her head toward the flickering orange flames lined up in the gas fireplace and asked,
"Were you feeling cold?"
"No, I just like the ambiance. It makes things feel a little less gray." Elle glanced out of the bay windows, where the sky was the exact same color it had been day and night since she first woke up here.
"It's hard for humans, I know," Alyssa said. "You'll start to get depressed if you spend too much longer here."
Elle turned to face her again. "How did you—" But her words trailed off. She hadn't yet been able to bring herself to ask Alyssa anything personal, like exactly how old she was, whether she'd ever been married, and how she ended up a vampire. Vampires weren't born, only made, and since it seemed all her immediate family members were vampires, Elle wondered if they'd all been turned at the same time, either voluntarily or against their will, which was illegal.
"How did I what?" Alyssa asked. There you are,"
Asriel said, striding into the lounge. Elle hadn't seen him in over a day, and she wasn't sure if he'd been elsewhere on the property or if he'd left.
"That friend of a friend who finally managed to put me in contact with the prince just called. He's at the border. Just helped Prince Dex to cross through."
"Oh, great." Elle snapped her book shut as anticipation curled inside her, and a flush heated her skin. Alyssa gave her a knowing look, which turned quickly into a smirk, and Elle frowned at her. "So, communications are possible inside an eternal night?" she asked before Alyssa could utter whatever embarrassing comment had been about to pass her lips. "Just not between an eternal night and the outside world?"
"Correct,"
Asriel said.
"We have networks and all of that set up within our eternal nights, just like in the rest of the world."
He frowned.
"I thought that was common knowledge. Most of what goes on inside the eternal nights, the known ones, anyway, isn't a secret."
"Right, of course," Elle said. If she hadn't been forced to leave school at such a young age, she probably would have learned this at some point. Perhaps Sienna had mentioned it as part of one of her classes, but if so, Elle had forgotten.
So, should we give you and Prince just a crush some alone time when he gets here?
Alyssa asked with an innocent smile.
Alyssa,
Asriel grumbled.
I'm sorry, she's just so easy to tease,
Alyssa answered with a laugh. Elle picked up the book and smacked Alyssa's leg. Yes, actually, some alone time would be good. We might want to talk about things that have nothing to do with you.
Oh, like how he's in love with... Wow, when did you turn 5 years old?
Asriel asked, his tone perfectly deadpan.
Hey, don't hate me just because I'm not grumpy like you,
Alyssa replied, reaching for a cushion and tossing it across the room at her brother. Asriel dodged easily, sighed, and left the room. Elle opened her book again, a history of magical maladies that all had something to do with blood, and pretended to study it intently. After a few minutes, Alyssa gave up on teasing her and went in search of a glass of wine. Elle's eyes scanned the pages of the book, searching for any mention of the symptoms Dex had exhibited, but it was hard to remain focused when she knew he might arrive at any moment. When the sound of the front door opening reached her ears, she lowered the book to her lap and looked up. Her heart thumped unusually fast as she listened. Was that Dex's voice? Were those his footsteps coming toward the lounge? He appeared in the doorway, and Elle stood abruptly, her lips stretching into a smile. The book fell and hit her bare foot. Oh, ow! She dropped down quickly, picked up the book, and placed it on the glass coffee table before straightening hastily. Hey, hi. Despite the fact that she was making an idiot of herself in front of him yet again, Dex's face lit up with a kind of smile that Alyssa, who stood at his side, would no doubt tease her endlessly about later.
I'll let you guys talk,
she said, throwing a smirk in Elle's direction before turning and disappearing.
I know I said I trust Asriel and his sister,
Dex said, walking forward.
But I have to admit I'm relieved to see you're okay. Part of me dreaded the possibility that I may have been wrong about them, and that they wouldn't allow me in a second time.
Yeah, I'm fine, Elle said. I've just been reading and, well, mainly reading. Dex stopped in front of her, and an awkward moment passed in which she moved to hug him, he moved to kiss her, and his chin ended up bumping her forehead. She laughed, and he apologized, and then he pulled her against his chest and wrapped his arms securely around her. She melted a little bit.
It's only been a few days, but I missed you terribly,
he murmured against her hair. I missed you too, she said. She knew it was silly. 2 weeks ago, she hadn't even met Dex yet, and now she couldn't get him out of her head. What's going on out there? She asked as they parted. Has your father done anything drastic yet? Have the vampires made another move?
No, nothing major's happened yet. My father's trying to locate Savoy, and he's tasked my mother with organizing the Ball 2.0, because apparently I still need a wife, and the first ball wasn't enough of a disaster to deter him from hosting a second, more intimate, more exclusive party. But that's not important right now.
As they sat, Dex took her hand in his and rubbed his thumb reassuringly across her skin.
I have some bad news.
Oh no.
Well, it might not be bad, depending on your point of view.
He took a deep breath, then said,
Cress went to see Sienna.
Oh no, what happened? Elle gasped as the icy fingers of fear squeezed around her chest.
She's fine,
Dex added hastily.
I mean, I'm pretty sure she's fine. But, Elle, she ran away.
What? Elle pulled her hand free of Dex's. No, are you sure? She wasn't just late for school or something?
I'm sure. After Cress checked Sienna's school, she went to your house. According to your stepmother, a bag and some of Sienna's things were gone. It's been a few days now, and when I sent a message this morning, Sienna still hadn't shown up.
No, Elle moaned, pressing her palms to her cheeks. She wasn't supposed to do that. It isn't safe out there for her on her own. I was supposed to go with her.
She's Fae, Elle. I'm sure she'll be fine.
I know, but she's only 17.
And you're a grand total of, what, 21, 22?
Well, 19, actually, Elle admitted.
Oh, but you were in that club the night we met.
Fake ID. Obviously, I had to pretend I was both Fae and old enough to get in there. Anyway, I might be only 2 years older than Sienna, but I've had more experience out there in the big bad world than she has. I know that doesn't make sense, seeing as I've been a slave for so long, but it's the truth. I've seen more and survived more. I should be with her to protect her. She shouldn't have left on her own.
I understand what you're saying, but isn't it more important that she got away from her abusive mother?
Well, yes, that's definitely a positive, but...
And she has magic, Elle. She isn't powerless. And if she survived her abusive mother this long, then she has more resilience than most her age. She'll be fine.
Ugh. Elle slid her hands into her hair and tugged. I suppose I don't have much choice but to believe that you're right.
Your stepmother reported her missing, and the police have been through the standard tracking procedure. But the spell just takes them to your home, the same way it did when I was looking for you.
So she's hiding somehow, like me, Elle said, staring past Dex. Either in an eternal night or by using some form of magical protection.
Yes, but I asked Ollie to make sure we hear about it if the police find her.
Okay. Thank you. Elle lowered her hands and clasped them together in her lap. She got away. I have to focus on that part. She got away from Salvia.
Yes.
Wait. Elle focused on Dex again as her mind backtracked a few steps. Is it a problem for you that I'm younger than you thought? Dex frowned at the sudden change of subject.
Oh, no, I was surprised, that's all. But you're still the same person. Age is only a number, right?
Well, it could one day be a very big number for you if we cure you of the darkness. It'll only ever be a small number for me. He gave her a sad smile.
I think it's more likely it'll be a small number for me, too. Probably much smaller than the age you'll one day reach.
Elle took Dex's hand again and gave it a determined squeeze. There's a library here, a huge one, and I've been looking through as many books as I can find that mention any sort of magical illness. Unless the Godmother invented something brand new specifically for you and your brother, then we should be able to find it in a book somewhere, right?
Maybe,
Dex said, his tone suggesting he didn't quite agree.
But remember that my parents have had people searching for a cure for this for years. If they haven't found anything yet, maybe it's because the Godmother really did conjure up something no one's ever suffered from before. Then the only way to get rid of it would probably be to make a deal with her, and there's no way I'm doing that.
Elle let out a heavy sigh. Maybe it's a waste of time looking through these books, but it's not as though I have much else to do. So as long as I'm here, I'll keep looking.
Thanks.
She hesitated, wondering if bringing up the past might be too painful for him. When your brother died, she said carefully, slowly, giving him a chance to tell her he didn't want to talk about this. But his expression remained open.
Yes?
He asked. He was younger than you are now.
Yes, he was.
Is that why you think you might die soon? Dex breathed in, breathed out, and swallowed.
Yes, though I'm not as weak yet as he was when he passed away. The potion Cress makes definitely helps. My brother didn't have that.
He rolled his eyes and added,
My parents never trusted any of Cress's experimental potions. They were always worried she was using unauthorized shifter magic or something, though what that could possibly be I have no idea, since shifters generally can't do anything with magic except shift. But they were worried about something ancient to do with dragons? I don't know. Cress assured me she wasn't using any non-Fae methods.
He shook his head.
Anyway, I told my parents I didn't care. If something made a positive difference, I wanted to keep taking it. So I did, without their knowledge.
Elle tipped her head to the side a little and examined Dex. It sounds like there's a lot you do without your parents' knowledge. He lifted one shoulder in an easy shrug, a smile curving his lips.
I can't really argue with that observation. I've been breaking the rules for a long time. Ever since...
He trailed off, his expression becoming thoughtful.
Yeah, probably ever since the day I convinced my nanny to sneak me off the palace grounds and into the forest beyond. You know, not on the side where the main entrance is. The other side. I could see the trees from the windows of the palace, but I could never get to them. I begged for her help until one day she gave in.
You know, Elle said, your parents probably set those rules for a reason. You were just a child. What if something had happened to you while you were outside the palace walls with no one to protect you but your nanny?
I know. I realize that now. But back then, I thought it was the best adventure ever. After I'd been out once, I wanted to go again. So I convinced Liana to help me sneak out more often. We would meet up with her friend and her friend's daughter, race around for a few hours with the forest as our playground, and then return home.
And nothing ever went wrong?
No. Not until...
Dex looked down, his shoulders slumping a little.
I got up one day and she was gone. My mother told me I didn't need a nanny anymore, that I was too old for one. Which was probably true, but I always wondered if there was more to it than that. If maybe my parents found out she was sneaking me out of the palace grounds and fired her. Or worse. Years later, when I was older and people actually took my questions seriously, I tried to find out. But no one seemed to know what happened to her.
So you don't actually know if you have anything to feel guilty about, Elle said.
Well, there's the fact that I involved her in my rule breaking. I definitely feel guilty about that. Anyway.
He shook himself a little.
That's in the past, and we should be discussing the present. Specifically, your slave charm.
Oh, yes. Did you find anything useful? I think I'm starting to feel a little bit of pain, but nothing serious yet.
I think we did find something useful. Cress and I were talking after we left here last time, discussing all the legal aspects of casting a slave charm upon someone. You know, like how it's illegal to enslave a human once he or she has already been freed. And we both suddenly remembered that if a human is born free, it's illegal to enslave him or her. That was one of the changes my grandfather made. And you were born free, right? If this woman is your stepmother, she must have married your father, which means he must have been a free human, and therefore you were free too.
But, Elle interrupted before Dex could go any further, if a human is underage and her only legal guardian is a fairy, that fairy has the right to enslave her. Dex remained silent for a moment, his mouth half open.
Seriously? That's legal?
Yes, and that law about not being able to enslave a human once he or she has been freed? That doesn't always stand. If a human is convicted of a crime, one of the possible sentences is the slave charm. Dex's fingers curled into fists.
It makes me sick that my father allows this kind of thing.
Your father wants far worse than the laws that currently exist, Elle reminded him quietly.
I know. It's disgusting. He doesn't deserve to be.
Dex pressed his lips together, cutting off the remainder of his words, which sounded suspiciously as though they may have been bordering on treasonous. He let out a long breath, then continued, sounding calmer now.
So, the only way out of this is to negotiate with your stepmother.
What?
It's simple. I'll ask her what her price is. Whatever she wants, she can have it, as long as she removes your slave charm.
For several moments, Elle couldn't speak. You would do that for me? You'd give her anything she wants? To save a person you barely know?
Elle, I feel like I know you better than anyone I've met in years. I may not know all the facts about you, all the experiences you've had, your history, your likes and dislikes, but I feel like I know what kind of person you are. And that kind of person—"
He trailed off, shook his head, then smiled.
"Yeah, that kind of person is absolutely worth saving."
Elle raised her hand and gently brushed her knuckles along the faint stubble of Dex's jaw. "I really want to kiss you right now." He lifted his hand to cover hers, a light sparking in his silver blue eyes.
"I wouldn't stop you."
"But," she said, pulling her hand out from beneath his and leaning away from him, "I don't want to distract myself from telling you that negotiating with my stepmother is a terrible idea." Dex paused.
"Why?"
"I know exactly what she'll ask for, Dex, and you can't give it to her."
"Why not?"
"Because she'll ask that you marry Meredith." Dex blinked.
"But that's a really high price. Why would she even try that?"
"Because I'm worth that much to her." Dex's eyes narrowed.
"Why?"
Elle allowed herself a deep inhale and one long exhale before speaking again. "This is the thing Asriel said I hadn't told you yet. It's the thing that people pay me essence for. The thing that makes it easy for my stepmother to con people out of money and jewels so she can continue living a comfortable lifestyle without having to actually work for it."
"Okay,"
Dex said slowly. "You know that I'm human, right? You've seen the color of my blood. But there's something about me that's different. I can—" She swallowed. "I can remove memories." Dex's frown deepened.
"I'm sorry, you can what?"
"Remove memories. I can slip into a person's mind and remove a chunk of time and all the memories that go along with it. Just a simple nudge and the memories are gone forever. That's what people pay me for. They come to me when there are things they want to forget."
How is that possible? You're human. You don't have magic."
Elle opened her mouth to say she had no idea, but before she could utter a word, a door banged shut somewhere nearby. Footsteps, sharp, confident, grew closer, and into the lounge strode the Godmother. Chapter 8. Dex leaped immediately to his feet and lunged at the elegant, white-haired woman. Bright golden light flashed, throwing him clear across the room. He slammed into a wall and slumped to the ground. "Dex!" Elle jumped up and hurried between the couches toward him, but he was on his feet again before she reached his side.
"Silly boy,"
the Godmother said.
"Don't you remember all the wards that have been placed around you to protect you from me? Conveniently, they also protect me from you. You don't seem to have factored that into your little kill the Godmother plot."
Dex began making strange hand motions near his body, muttering things Elle couldn't hear properly. "Are you okay?" she asked, reaching for him.
"And you,"
the Godmother said. Elle lowered her hand and twisted to find the woman's dark brown gaze boring into her.
"You failed to pay the price I set. I assume you don't want your freedom as badly as you told me you did."
Anger rushed hotly through Elle's veins. "How did you find us?" she demanded.
"I'm the Godmother,"
she stated simply, as if that should be answer enough. She stalked past Elle and Dex and took a seat near the fireplace.
"Now, we need to talk."
Before she could continue, 2 streaks of color flashed across the room, coming to an abrupt halt in front of her. Alyssa's hands were curled into fists, while Asriel leaned forward, gripped both sides of the armchair, and brought his face right in front of the Godmother's.
"How dare you?"
"Everyone calm down," the Godmother said, pulling her head away from Asriel's. "Why don't you all take a seat and we can act like the rational beings that we are.
You have no idea who I am or whether I possess a rational bone in my body,
Asriel growled, his hands squeezing tighter on the armrests. Don't lie to me, Asriel. You used your love for Mariel to rationalize everything you did for the Allegiant. You know exactly what it is to be rational. Now sit down. Asriel straightened, his mouth hanging open and a deep crease forming between his brows.
Fine,
he said eventually.
But if you show the slightest hint of hurting anyone beneath my roof—
Oh, for goodness sake. I didn't come here to hurt anyone. I could have sent other people to do that. I came here to talk.
Better talk quickly then,
Dex said, still moving his hands and fingers in strange motions around his head and body.
As soon as these wards are gone, I'm coming for you.
Yes, I see. The godmother arched an unimpressed eyebrow, sounding bored as she added, I'm shivering. So you're here to talk? Elle asked, moving to the nearest couch and lowering herself to the edge. She remained poised to leap to her feet at the first sign of a threat from the godmother. On the couch opposite her, Asriel and Alyssa sat slowly. Yes, the godmother said. And if you must know, Elle, it really wasn't that difficult to track you down after you escaped my magic. I got hold of the palace's security footage. Dex looked up. How did you— Then I had my people examine it, until someone identified the vampire who took you. I found out everything I needed to know about Asriel, including the location of every place he's lived. Within a day of sending my people out to look, I'd narrowed down the options to his family home in the Barrel Eternal Night. One of my vampire contacts brought me across the border from the outside world into this one, and here I am. She spread her hands wide, palms up. Well done, Elle said, her voice heavy with sarcasm.
So my strength is greater than the godmother's magic,
Asriel said.
Good to know.
The godmother narrowed her eyes at him. It was a simple spell. If I'd known Elle might encounter anything more than air on her way home, I would have cast a stronger one. So are you here to talk about how I disappointed you by not killing Dex? Elle asked. Or is there something more important on your mind? The godmother folded her hands neatly in her lap. Savoy is coming after me and my empire. Apparently, not all of his magic-enhanced vampires perished at that disaster of a ball the other night. He sent a few of them my way the next day. You know, I've never conducted business with vampires, and it seems that this new world Savoy is hoping to establish for himself once he's king does not include me.
Amazing,
Dex muttered, his hands pausing for a moment.
Who would have thought I'd have something in common with Savoy?
The godmother let out a dramatic sigh. I know you think I ruined your life, Chevalier Belmont, but it was your father who made a terrible wish and was never willing to make another one to undo it.
You set the price,
Dex hissed.
You killed my brother.
This is all quite enlightening, Alyssa murmured.
And also none of your business,
Dex replied. Anyway, the godmother continued, my plan is simple. I find Savoy and kill him. Asriel let out a humorless grunt of a laugh.
Even if you knew where to find him, you'd never get close enough to actually kill him. You won't even make it through the front door. And if you do, there are his guards to deal with. And if you get past them, there's still the additional magic he bought from some fairy or other to protect himself.
I know. Which is why I'll be taking him the one thing he wants more than anything else right now. She looked at Elle.
You.
Excuse me? Elle asked.
I know he wants you. He's been searching for you for years. If I pretend I want to form an alliance with him and offer him you as a show of good faith, perhaps he'll allow me to get close enough.
Elle swallowed. How did the godmother know he'd been searching for her for years? How did she know any of the things she knew? The memory of what the godmother had said during their first conversation, that Elle had killed someone with her memory-wiping ability, knocked on the inside of her brain. She wanted to ask if it was true, if it was Savoy's father. But at the same time, did she really want to know? She cleared her throat, pushing her fears aside. So you need help. That's why you're here. Don't pretend that the death of the vampire heir would benefit only me. He's putting the stability of our whole country at risk. Surely none of you want that. All I'm hearing, Elle said, is that when someone needs help from you, they have to pay a terrible price in order to get it. But if you need help, oh, that's different. We should all jump to help you. Not at all. The godmother crossed one leg over the other and smiled. Why don't you make another wish, Elle? How dare you make such a suggestion? Dex muttered, his hands moving even faster now. Elle, I'm nearly free of this damn protective magic. Wish again for your freedom, the godmother continued, disregarding Dex's interruption. And this time, the only price I ask is that you accompany me on my journey to visit Vincenzo Savoy. Once I've killed him, you'll be free to go. Properly free. Elle folded her arms over her chest. I thought you didn't deal with people a second time if they refused or failed to pay their price the first time. That's your rule. Precisely. It's my rule, and therefore, I'm allowed to break it. So all you want me to do is remain with you until you get close enough to Savoy to kill him? Yes. Oh, and keep the prince from killing me, she added hastily as Dex rushed toward her. If he kills me, I'll never be able to give you your freedom. Dex stopped mere inches from her, his hands raised, fairy dust glittering on his fingers. That's not the only way for Elle to gain her freedom, he said through gritted teeth. Really? The godmother asked. She looked at Elle. Do tell me about this other option that has suddenly materialized. Elle let out a resigned breath. Don't kill her, Dex. I'm pretty sure she's still the only chance I have at freedom, other than you marrying my stepsister, which I don't consider a viable option. And more importantly, she probably has a better chance of killing Savoy than any of us. Trust me, Elle, we can make a plan without her. Elle stood and moved to Dex's side. She placed her hand on his arm. Please, she said quietly. Killing her isn't going to fix anything. No, but it'll keep her from messing with the lives of all the people who have yet to summon her for a wish. But you're not a murderer, Elle said, her voice even quieter now. You can find another way to bring down her empire. To her side, the godmother snickered, as if that idea were preposterous. Dex lowered his hands and scrutinized Elle's face. You really want to make another bargain with her? I don't want to, but if I can get my freedom and she can stop Savoy, that sounds worth it to me. Excellent, the godmother said. You're forgetting something, Asriel interrupted, and Elle turned to look at him. I haven't agreed to tell anyone where to find Savoy. An uncharted eternal night, the godmother said. I don't know which one, but I have enough vampire contacts that I'm almost certain I could find out. Wonderful, Asriel said, his tone suggesting there was nothing about this situation that he found wonderful in the least. I'm glad to know I don't need to get involved. But it would waste far less time, Asriel. the godmother said. "If you told me."
The amount of time you waste on this little mission of yours isn't my concern,
he replied. This little mission? Not your concern. The godmother shook her head. I know you don't agree with what Savoy is doing. Will you enjoy living with the guilt when he manages to make a mess of our country because I didn't have enough time to complete my little mission?
I don't want to be the one to give away a secret vampires have kept for centuries.
The godmother laughed. Trust me, there are people other than vampires who know about the uncharted eternal nights. They know how many there are and where to find them. Not all vampires can keep a secret.
Well, I can,
Asriel snapped. Asriel, Alyssa said quietly, what if you don't tell her? What if you don't show her either? What if you just take her there and don't let her know where you're going? If you're planning to tie a blindfold over my eyes or put a pillowcase over my head, I may have to object, the godmother said. Strongly. Asriel nodded slowly.
I think I like that idea.
The godmother rolled her eyes. Of course you do. Asriel remained silent another few moments, during which Elle returned to her spot on the couch. Dex sat stiffly beside her, his hand gripping her knee.
Okay, I'll take you there,
Asriel said eventually.
But only if you do something in return for me.
Ah, a bargain. The godmother rubbed her hands together. You know I like those. Asriel narrowed his eyes, then continued.
Savoy has something with which he controls the enhanced army he purchased from Asriel. He calls it his scepter. It's a staff with a large red gem sitting atop it. The control charm is within the gem. When you've killed him, I want you to destroy it. Only then will every one of those vampires be free.
The godmother pursed her lips. I've heard of this army. Vampires with even more speed and strength. I assume Savoy plans to give them all magic at some point.
Yes, that was his plan. Get hold of Elle, find out how to complete the ritual properly, and give endless magic to his enhanced army.
Well, he certainly won't get the chance to do any of that. I'll kill him, and then I'll destroy that gem.
What guarantee do I have that you're telling the truth? I'll make sure it happens,
Dex said. Oh, and since when are you coming with me? The godmother asked, though she looked amused rather than surprised.
Of course I'm coming. Someone needs to make sure you actually do all the things you're promising to do. You can tell Savoy I'm your prisoner, if that'll make it easier for us to get close to him. The Fae Prince plus the girl with all the answers he's been looking for. He can't say no to that, can he?
Elle placed her hand over Dex's, letting him know with a gentle squeeze just how grateful she was that she didn't have to do this without him. Why doesn't this gem thing control you as well? She asked Asriel. You were part of that army too.
I got away after we all escaped the man who experimented on us. I thought everyone else was free as well. But Asriel had told Savoy where we'd be, and he managed to trap almost everyone else. Only, once he had the army in his possession, did he acquire this gem and place magical control over everyone. I wasn't present for that spell.
Well, now that we've all agreed on what to do next, the godmother said, rising to her feet. Let's get moving. What, right now? Elle asked. Do you have something more important to do? The godmother asked. Well, no, but I'm not a prince. She looked at Dex. I assumed you might need to, I don't know, rearrange your schedule or something? He shook his head.
I'll be in trouble anyway when my parents figure out I've taken the plane again. May as well make it worth it.
Okay. Elle looked at the godmother and shrugged. I guess we can go then. Actually, wait. As soon as I leave this eternal night, my stepmother will be able to find me. That could be a problem,
Shouldn't be.
Asriel said.
You'll only be between eternal nights for a few hours at the most. That won't be long enough for your stepmother to get from Vale City to where we'll be.
So I guess I'll just go back to my normal, boring life? Alyssa chimed in, slumping back against the couch cushions. The godmother shrugged. If your normal life is boring, I'm afraid that's your problem, dear, not ours. I suppose you're right, said Alyssa with a frown. So, Asriel. The godmother clasped her hands together. Should I be expecting a pillowcase over my head at any moment? Asriel sighed as he rose from the couch.
Not just yet. We can drive from here to the edge of the Barrel Eternal Night and cross back into the daylight world. From there, I assume you can get us quickly back into Astronerica?
The godmother gave him her most radiant smile. With a snap of my fingers, darling.
Good. I'll arrange for a car to meet us. I'll drive from there, and the back windows will be blacked out, magically, so you don't know where we're going. Though pillowcases can certainly be arranged if you'd prefer.
Hang on, Dex said. Are you saying there's an eternal night inside my own country? That's where Savoy is?
Yes, and that's all I'll be saying.
Asriel turned and strode toward the door.
Let's go.
Chapter 9. Blackness pressed in on Elle, squeezing, squeezing, squeezing. When her surroundings finally expanded around her with a pop, she staggered forward and bent over. Sucking in a gulp of air, she tried not to give in to the urge to vomit. A hand touched her back, rubbing gently.
Are you okay?
Dex asked. I'm sorry, dear Elle, the godmother said from somewhere nearby. I always forget that humans do not say you forgot we don't react well to things like being squeezed through space from one spot to another. Elle gasped, straightening and facing the woman. It's been barely a week since the last time you did that to me. You've forgotten nothing. The godmother smiled. I've told you before that I like you, haven't I? Elle pressed her lips together to hold back the shut up that wanted to slip out. The godmother may infuriate her, but she was still afraid of the woman.
That spell?
Dex said, facing the godmother. Yes, yes. It's ancient and difficult, and very, very few have perfected it. I'm one of them.
I was going to say I'm pretty sure it's illegal when used to travel to a different country.
Oh, yes, I suppose it is. But we don't have time to waste. I'm sure your pilot won't mind flying your plane back from Varens to Astronerica without you. Dex sighed and looked around.
I assume I'm not allowed to ask exactly where we are right now?
Elle followed his gaze and took in rolling hills, the occasional tree, and the sun setting in the distance. She smiled at the purple and peach colors lighting up the puffs of cloud as she soaked in the last remaining daylight. It felt indescribably good to see the sun again.
You can ask,
Asriel said to Dex.
But I won't answer.
You could ask me, the godmother suggested, since young Asriel had to tell me where to transport us.
Young Asriel?
The vampire repeated. But of course I wouldn't answer either, the godmother assured him, since this is all highly secretive.
Oh, look,
Asriel deadpanned.
Here's the car. I'm so excited for this adventure.
The growl of a vehicle reached Elle's ears, and she looked around to see a black limousine driving up the winding gravel road, a smaller car just behind it. Asriel stepped into the road, and both vehicles came to a smooth stop in front of him. From the driver's side of the limo, a vampire stepped out.
Thanks. I owe you one,
Asriel said to her. She shrugged. Not a problem for an old friend.
And the windows in the back compartment are enchanted?
Yes, placed by a friend who knows all about these things. But if this woman is who you say she is... The vampire surveyed the group, her eyes stopping on the godmother. She'll probably be able to mess with the enchantment pretty easily. But we won't let that happen, Elle said hastily, because we respect your desire to keep things confidential. She gave the godmother a stern look. Right? Absolutely, the godmother replied with a smile.
Let's just get this done,
Asriel grumbled. He climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the front door shut. His vampire friend headed for the smaller car without another glance at the group. Dex opened the limo's back door, and Elle bent her head as she climbed inside. She slid across the white leather interior while the godmother took a seat across from her. Dex climbed in last and pulled the door shut, cutting out the last of the natural light. Elle sighed internally as Dex sat beside her. The sun was nice while it lasted, she thought.
I still don't trust you,
Dex said to the godmother as the limo pulled away with a crunch of tires against gravel. She smiled.
What a surprise. Which is why I'm going to perform a truth spell on you.
She let out a full-bodied laugh.
That's not happening. So we're supposed to just believe that everything you've told us today is the truth?
Dex, she said, I have the kind of magic you can only dream of. Now that you've so helpfully removed all your wards, I could snuff you out of existence like that. She snapped her fingers, and Elle flinched, expecting something terrible to happen. Nothing did. But I haven't, the godmother continued. That should be enough to suggest I have your best interests at heart.
My best interests?
Dex snorted.
A few days ago, you wanted me dead.
Because you wanted me dead. Now that Elle has convinced you that's a bad idea, we can all play nicely together.
You say that, but...
The godmother slid forward, her hand flashed out, and she grabbed Dex's. She tugged him closer, holding their clasped hands up between them. Elle moved forward, then froze, unsure whether intervening would make things worse. Here's your truth spell, young man, the godmother said. What? You've cast it before, so you know what it feels like. You know I'll tell you the truth now.
How did you... You did that in an instant.
Because I'm the godmother. Now, do I want Savoy gone as badly as you do? Yes. Do I have every intention of killing him? Yes. Will I follow through on my side of the bargain and grant Elle her wish for freedom once I've killed him? Yes. She let go of Dex's hand and sat back. Satisfied? Dex slid backward on the seat, breathing heavily.
As much as I can be, I suppose.
Elle's gaze bounced back and forth between them, her heart still galloping in her chest. Is the truth spell still on her? Dex shook his head.
She ended it.
Oh. The godmother's dark eyes swung toward her. Is there something you wanted to ask, my dear Elle? Yes, but now I have no idea if you'll answer with the truth. You can ask anyway. If I don't want to tell you the truth, then I'll say nothing. Elle breathed shallowly, almost too afraid to voice her question. Then she cleared her throat and asked, Did I kill Savoy's father? The godmother considered her for a moment before answering. Yes. Something cracked inside Elle's chest. At least, that was the way it felt as she struggled to take her next breath. Dex gripped her hand and she held on tight, as if he were the only thing anchoring her to this world. She swallowed and asked, Then did I take the memory from myself? Yes. But how could I do something so terrible?
How was I capable of that? Of actually ending someone's life?
You were very young. You didn't know what you were doing. The ability was new to you. You were supposed to take Nazario Savoy's memory of the ritual that gives magic to vampires so that he could never use it. But you took everything. Every memory. His whole mind. Though you were young, you understood afterwards what had happened. So your mother encouraged you to take the memory from yourself.
How do you know this?
Because your mother told me about it afterwards.
My mother? She knew you?
Yes, but
you can't say any more because, let me guess, that's someone else's story. Her story.
correct.
That makes no sense. I'm her daughter. Why don't I get to know her story? If she were alive, she would tell me.
Would she?
Yes! The godmother sighed, her lips turning down in consideration.
Perhaps she would. Or perhaps she'd tell you to snuggle up beneath that lovely quilt she made and trace your finger over all the stars.
I'm sorry, what? Is that supposed to be some kind of riddle?
No. Your quilt is real, is it not?
Holy stars, you're the most frustrating person I've ever met. The godmother smiled.
Thank you.
I'm done trying to have a conversation with you. Elle huffed, turning her head to look past Dex. Angry tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away.
Hey,
Dex said quietly.
it was a mistake. You didn't mean to take his life.
I'd prefer not to talk about it, Elle murmured. And so they sat in silence, the minutes ticking slowly by. And of the three of them, the godmother was the only one who seemed at ease. Elle's shoulders remained stiff and her breathing refused to return to normal, while beside her, she could sense Dex's tension. She longed to fold into him and let herself cry, but there was no way she would let herself do that in front of the godmother. Dex reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked the screen and scrolled through the collection of icons. I thought communication wasn't possible between an eternal night and the outside world, Elle said.
It isn't.
Dex lowered the phone to his lap with a sigh.
It's just habit, I suppose. Checking one's phone when there's nothing else to do.
What's that picture you've used for the background? Elle asked. He picked up the phone again and showed her.
The view from my bedroom balcony. That's the forest I was telling you about. The one beyond the wall, where I used to sneak out and play. And then past those hills, you can see the ocean.
It's beautiful, Elle said, taking the phone and peering closer at the picture. It was far prettier than any view she'd ever had, even when she lived at Fernvale, Salvia's old home.
There was this stream running through the forest,
Dex added.
And I managed to use my very basic knowledge of magic to build a little hut of sticks that floated above the water. With Liana's help, of course. Here, I'll show you.
He took the phone and began thumbing through apps. You have photos from way back then? Elle asked. On your phone?
Yes. They were in printed albums originally. Liana, my nanny, gave them to me. But my mother demanded I clear out all the clutter from my rooms last year. So someone digitized everything for me.
Elle watched as Dex's thumb moved quickly across the screen and photos sped by. Wait, stop, she said, her hand reaching out to grab the phone before she could stop herself. I'm sorry, can you go back a few photos?
Oh, yes, of course.
Elle's heart pounded faster as her thumb slid across the screen. She thought she'd seen... but it couldn't be. She must have imagined it. And yet, she had to make sure. Her thumb moved again, and her heart almost stopped. There were two women in the photo, both blonde, though one was human and the other was fae.
An odd ringing filled Elle's ears as her blood crashed wildly through her veins.
"What's wrong?"
Dex asked, his voice piercing through the ringing. He pointed at the Fey woman in the photo.
"That's Liana, my nanny."
Elle touched the screen, placing her finger delicately on the other woman in the photo. That's my mother. Chapter 10. Ripples of hot and cold raced across Elle's body as Dex stared at her.
"What? No, that's Liana's friend," he said. "Remember I told you we used to meet her sometimes when we snuck out of the palace grounds? She always came with her—"
He trailed off before quietly finishing.
"With her daughter."
Elle swallowed, unable to tear her eyes from Dex's face. The confusion she saw there must surely mirror her own. Her mother's best friend was the woman who'd taken care of Dex as a child? Elle and Dex had played together when they were very young? What kind of crazy coincidence was that? Then, suddenly remembering they weren't alone in the limo, Elle turned the phone to face the godmother. "Do you know about this?" she demanded. The godmother frowned, appearing only vaguely interested. "Why would I know anything about that photo?" "You said you knew my mother." "I didn't say I knew her well. But you—" Her body rocked sideways as the limo came to a stop. "Oh, good, we're here," the godmother said, sliding to the edge of her seat. "Tell me what you know," Elle begged. "Please." "I'm sorry, but I can't help you with that photo, Elle. I don't know anything about it. Right now, we have a vampire to confront." "This is crazy," Dex said, taking the phone from Elle and shoving it into his pocket. "How strange that we've actually met before. I mean, you were very little, 3 or 4, maybe, so I doubt you remember it." Elle shook her head. "I don't." The godmother exited the limo, and Elle and Dex followed. "I don't see an abode of any sort," the godmother commented, turning on the spot. Elle looked around at the desolate gray landscape. "We're not there yet," Asriel said. "But this is as far as I'm going." He pointed to a rock shaped roughly like a bird's head and added, "As you crest that hill, you'll see Savoy's home in the distance. You can't miss it. It's the only one out here." "You're not driving us to the front door?" the godmother asked. "No. You can walk the rest of the way or use your transportation magic, if it works here. But I'm not getting any closer to Savoy than this." "My magic works here," the godmother said dismissively. "It can't cross the border into or out of an eternal night, that's all." "How will we get back to the normal world after we're done?" Elle asked. "I'll wait for you here," Asriel said. "Okay then." The godmother raised her hands. "Time for you both to be shackled." "Shackled?" Dex repeated. "Yes, Savoy and his people need to think you're my prisoners, remember?" "I know, but can you restrain us with something a little easier to get out of than metal chains?" "Oh, these will be easy, don't worry. I won't enchant them. A bit of fairy dust, and they should melt right away." She snapped the fingers of her right hand, and then her left. Dex's shackles appeared first, tugging his hands together in front of him, and a second later, Elle was bound in the same way. She watched as Dex tested whether it really was as easy to break free as the godmother had suggested. After the shackles melted from his wrists and vanished, he held his arms out to be restrained a second time. "Still having trust issues, I see," the godmother muttered. Then she snapped her fingers again. The world vanished with a sickening jolt, and when it reappeared moments later, Elle strained to pull air into her squashed lungs. "I wish you'd warned me," she gasped. "It wouldn't help. Now, please don't ruin things before I can get close enough to Savoy." Elle turned slowly, and right behind her rose a stylish building that appeared to be constructed of numerous white boxes and plenty of glass. Through some of the enormous windows, she could see curving staircases, plants standing in giant pots. How did they grow in a world without sun? And an art canvas splashed with red and turquoise. Wow, you brought us right here. How do you do that without seeing exactly where the house was? Let's go, the godmother replied, heading for the glass front doors without bothering to answer Elle's question.
Why has no one tried to stop us yet? Dex asked. With all that glass, we must have been spotted the moment we appeared here. Someone like Savoy would make sure to have plenty of security.
Perhaps he can see that I've brought him a gift. As they approached the front door, a vampire appeared on the other side. He held the door open as the godmother swept inside. Elle and Dex shuffled in after her.
Godmother,
the vampire said with a small bow.
I was told to expect you.
Excellent, the godmother replied. Elle exchanged a frown with Dex. That didn't sound right. Or had the godmother mentioned contacting Savoy? Maybe she had, and Elle had missed that part.
I'll show you to our Lord King's throne room, the vampire said.
Lovely.
Lord King?
Dex repeated in a whisper.
His throne room?
The godmother shot him an icy glare. You will not speak unless I ask you to, she snapped loudly, presumably for the benefit of the vampire who was present. Dex rolled his eyes in response. They crossed the entrance area, skirting a rectangular fish pond, before heading along a glass passageway. Elle looked up through the transparent ceiling at the featureless gray sky. Utterly depressing, she thought. Perhaps if she spent too long in a world like this, she would also go a little crazy and want to take over a country where the sun shone at least some of the time. Leaving the passage behind, they walked into a long room, empty aside from a raised step at the other end, upon which sat a black glass seat that wouldn't have been out of place in a contemporary art museum. Large panes of glass on both sides of the room allowed expansive views of the gray world outside, but Elle's attention was fixed on the man sitting on the black glass throne. Untidy dark hair fell over red eyes and bronze skin, thanks to his heritage, Elle assumed, since it couldn't possibly be due to the sun. In his right hand, he gripped a polished wooden staff, topped by a glowing red gem the size of Elle's fist. His scepter.
Godmother,
he said with a smile.
Welcome to the Jade Eternal Night. It's good to see you again.
Okay, that definitely didn't sound right. Not for someone who'd supposedly sent people to attack the godmother just days ago. Vincenzo, the godmother replied, warmth filling her voice. What a lovely home. I apologize for not making time to visit you sooner. Say what? Elle halted. Okay, what in all the stars is— Silence, the godmother replied, her dark gaze snapping toward Elle.
Is that her?
Savoy asked, rising from his seat.
The one I've been looking for?
Yes.
And him?
Savoy thrust his chin toward Dex. A bonus gift. The godmother ushered Elle and Dex forward, and the only reason Elle played along was because of the truth spell in the limo. The godmother said she intended to kill him. So this was all part of the plan, right? It had to be. This is the Fey Prince, Chevalier of House Belmont, the godmother said as she, Elle, and Dex stopped a few feet away from Savoy and his throne. Savoy's brow rose.
You've outdone yourself, Godmother. I wish you'd come to me with your proposal months ago. It would have saved me a great deal of trouble.
Well, everything happens the way it happens for a reason, the godmother said smoothly.
Is the girl going to be difficult?
Savoy asked.
Am I going to have to use special methods to force the information out of her?
No, she won't be difficult at all. I know exactly how to get the information you need. The godmother moved to face Elle. She raised her hands. Instinctively, Elle tried to take a step back, but something held her in place. She tried to move her head, but that didn't work either. "What have you done to me?" she whispered. "Don't worry, you'll be absolutely fine." The godmother placed her fingers against Elle's temples. "Wait," Savoy instructed. In her peripheral vision, Elle noticed streaks of motion. Swiveling her eyes as far to each side as she could, she saw 3 vampires standing against the right-hand window and 3 on the left. "Merely a precaution," Savoy said, "in case you have any unpleasant tricks up your sleeve." "I understand completely," the godmother said. "Always better to be careful." Then she pressed her fingers into Elle's skin, and Elle gasped at the pain that shot through her head. "Elle!" She was vaguely aware of Dex rushing toward her, but she could barely focus on anything but the pain. "Stay back!" the godmother shouted. The pain slicing through Elle's mind lessened for a moment. "What did I tell you about ruining things?" Dex fell to his knees and didn't move, and Elle suspected the same magic that was paralyzing her now held him in place as well. The godmother returned her attention to Elle, and pain rebounded through her head again. Her thoughts became muddled, spinning around inside her mind, until nothing made sense, and she had no idea where she was or what had happened to bring her here. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the pain vanished. Her mind cleared instantly. The godmother lowered her hands, and Elle reared back with another gasp. Then she stilled. Though magic didn't hold her in place, shock did. In front of her, hanging in the air amid a swirling cloud of golden dust, was a semi-transparent image of 3 people. Elle as a young girl, her mother, and a man who looked very much like the one currently standing in front of a throne holding a scepter. "Is that it?" Savoy asked in an awed whisper. "The memory?" "Yes," the godmother said. "All you need to do is step into it, and it will become yours. You'll know everything your father knew before he died." "Where did that come from?" Elle whispered. I thought all the memories were gone." The godmother didn't answer her. Savoy stepped down from his throne. Something rippled and shimmered around him, like the surface of a lake that had just been disturbed, if a lake could be turned on its side. He moved forward, and the rippling layer of magic vanished. "Finally," the godmother murmured. Her hand slashed through the air, and black blood spurted from Savoy's chest. He crumpled forward with a cry as she lunged for the scepter. The vampires stationed around the room sped forward, but the godmother grasped the gem atop the scepter and shouted, "Stop! I am your commander now. You will obey me." The vampires froze, and Elle's wide eyes bounced from them back to Savoy, lying motionless on the floor with black liquid pooling around him. His red eyes, a symbol of the vampire magic coursing through his body, faded to a dark brown. "Thank you for playing your part, you two," the godmother said. She stepped over Savoy's body and climbed the single stair to the black glass throne. Turning, she slowly lowered herself to a seated position. She breathed in deeply, then exhaled. "Well, this is the first thing that's going to have to change. Far too uncomfortable, and we may need to add some decor to this room." "You may need to what?" Elle demanded as the meaning of the godmother's words sank into her. "You conniving hag," Dex hissed, rising to his feet. Apparently, the godmother wasn't doing anything to keep him or Elle in place anymore. "You're not going to destroy that scepter. Is this what you wanted all along? Control of a vampire army?" "You vampires, whatever your names are," the godmother said, ignoring Dex.
Take this body away. Remove his head and send it to King Beleric. Tell him it's a gift from the Godmother." She smoothed one hand over her white hair, a motion that was entirely unnecessary given that not a single hair was out of place. "And you two?" She focused on Elle, then turned her gaze to Dex. "I don't know what you're both so upset about. I did exactly what I said I would come here to do. I killed Savoy. This is the part where you say, thank you."
And that?
Dex pointed with shackled hands at the red gem.
You're supposed to destroy it now. And you're supposed to grant Elle her freedom.
Ah, yes. I may have lied about destroying this lovely little toy. The Godmother caressed the gem. I'm definitely not parting with something so valuable. At least, not until the time is right. But you're correct about one thing. I do owe Elle a wish. After all, she did pay the price I asked of her. She looked at Elle. A bargain is a bargain. For a moment, heat warmed Elle's ankle. Then it vanished. She crouched down and, with hands still shackled together, lifted the bottom of the pants she'd borrowed from Melissa. Her breath caught at the sight of her bare ankle. There was no chain-shaped tattoo marking her skin, nor any sign that one had ever been there. "It's gone," she said. "It's really gone. After all this time." Dex stepped past the vampires currently wrapping Savoy's body in what appeared to be a large piece of cloth. Fairy dust appeared on his hands, and his shackles melted away before he bent beside Elle and wrapped both arms around her. He kissed the top of her head and whispered,
You're finally free.
His hand brushed over her shackles, and they softened, fell away from her wrists, and disappeared. Then he straightened and faced the Godmother.
Destroy the scepter,
he said quietly.
That's the only other thing you need to do. Then we can part ways and never have to deal with one another again.
Until you find a way to bring down my empire, that is, the Godmother said.
Just destroy it.
What will you do to me if I don't, young prince?
You don't want to find out,
he growled. She chuckled. Oh, I really think I do. As the vampire guards lifted Savoy's wrapped body, Dex lunged forward and wrenched a dagger from the scabbard strapped to the nearest vampire's leg. With an expert aim, he threw it straight at the Godmother. She flicked her hand, and the blade spun around and shot back toward Dex. It pierced his chest and sank right up to the hilt. No! Elle gasped. Shock froze her to the spot, and she watched, helpless, as Dex staggered a few steps backward. His shaking hands rose to the hilt, but he dropped to his knees before he could grasp it. Then he fell onto his side, struggling for breath. Blood, as blue as the blood of any other fae, seeped into his shirt as his eyes slowly closed. Chapter 11. No, no, no! Elle rushed forward and dropped to the floor beside Dex. Her hands gripped his arm, touched his face, smoothed his hair back from his brow. What was she supposed to do? She turned her desperate gaze toward the Godmother. Why would you do that? You could have ducked, or flicked the weapon away, or frozen Dex in place before he reached the blade. Unruffled, the Godmother said, I could have. But then you wouldn't be in the position where you feel it necessary to make another wish. Elle paused, her breathing heavy, only fully realizing in that moment how calculating the Godmother truly was. She gripped the sleeve of Dex's shirt tightly in her fists. No, she said. No more wishes. Really? You'll let your beloved die? The Godmother's lips turned down.
I have to say, that's not what I expected of you, Elle. Elle forced out a slow breath and reminded herself to be calm, to be rational, to think. She looked down at Dex. His eyelids fluttered open and closed, and his chest still rose and fell. "He's not going to die," she said firmly. "He's Fae. He can survive a stab wound." "Normally, yes. But he can't survive a poison-laced stab wound." Elle's head snapped up. She narrowed her eyes at the Godmother. "You're lying. You have no idea what was on that blade." "I don't, but I've lived long enough to know that it's tradition for vampires to poison their weapons. Who knows how old these vampires are and if they're still following the traditional practices? Are you willing to take that risk?" Her gaze slid down to Dex. "He's struggling, Elle. I'm willing to bet there's poison seeping into his veins, mingling with the darkness that's already there. Perhaps it's a mercy to let him die now rather than suffer any longer due to his father's selfish wish." "No!" Elle squeezed her eyes shut. Tears dripped over her lashes. Why was she hesitating? She couldn't let Dex die. If their positions were reversed, he wouldn't waste another moment before bargaining with the Godmother. She hadn't known him particularly long, though that wasn't actually true, she reminded herself as the photo of her mother and Liana flashed through her mind. And yet she instinctively knew this about him. He would bargain with the woman he hated if it meant saving Elle. "So you're saying I should wish for you to heal him?" she asked, opening her eyes and looking up. "What terrible price are you asking this time?" "Who said it would be terrible?" Elle swallowed. It probably would be terrible, but it didn't matter. She was going to ask for a wish anyway. And if it was a terrible price, then she'd find a way to trick the Godmother, just as she'd been planning to do the first time. "Okay, I don't care. Just do it." "Do what?" the Godmother asked. "You need to tell me, Elle, so that I know exactly what you're wishing for. Are you wishing for him to be healed from a stab wound? Is that it?" "Yes, obviously," Elle shouted. But there was something in the Godmother's expression, a tilt to her lips and a glint in her eye, that made Elle pause. "Wait! Am I supposed to say something different? Do you mean, will he still end up dead even if you heal the stab wound?" "Damn you and your tricks," she yelled. "Just heal him of everything, okay? Everything that could possibly—" "Oh!" How could she have forgotten when the Godmother mentioned it mere moments ago? "The darkness! I wish you to heal him of the darkness, and the stab wound, and any possible poison in his system. I wish for you to heal him completely of anything that's wrong with him. Okay?" "As you wish," the Godmother said quietly. She raised her hands. Gold light pulsed away from her, blowing Elle's hair back and blinding her for several moments. As she blinked and slowly regained her vision, wisps of a dark substance came into view. They rose from Dex's skin, his arms, his neck, his face, and disappeared into the air like smoke. Elle's gaze trailed further down, and she realized the dagger was gone from Dex's chest. So was the blood that had stained his clothing. When it seemed all the darkness had vanished, she waited for him to wake. But the seconds ticked by, and he didn't move. Is he okay?" "He'll be fine. Now we need to discuss your price." Elle nodded, her heart settling somewhere near her toes. She straightened to face the Godmother. "Fine. Tell me what you want from me." The Godmother smiled as if all were right in the world. I want you to go on a quest, my dear Elle. A quest? Yes. She stood and walked toward Elle, never letting go of the scepter. Come, let the prince rest. It's time for me to tell you a story. This has been City of Wishes, a Cinderella story. Episode 4, The Eternal Night. Written by Rachel Morgan and narrated by Asriel Delisle. The story continues in Episode 5, The Starlight Quest. Alternatively, for the full story, search for City of Wishes, the complete Cinderella story.